Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, we are here to celebrate our special 200th episode of Rewind of the Living Dead. And we have a lot of new movies coming up in the near future, but we said we need to have a special celebration for our 200th episode. And we started debating and thinking, and what movie could we do? What movie should we talk about? Should we just do a regular review? Should we just pick something out? And then we both had a stroke of genius. A movie much like our famous Lost Boys episode, where we just full on gushed over a movie that we didn't try to pretend it was going to be some kind of critical analysis. We were going to break down what we loved and hated about a movie. We just full on said, we are going to tell you everything we love about this movie. And that is what we're doing tonight with our special 200th episode on The Monster Squad.
Oh, Damon, happy 200 episodes. Unbelievable achievement by you and me. Pat ourselves on the back. And thank you to all of our fantastic listeners out there. We'll get to you guys a little bit later. We're talking about The Monster Squad. Now, if you are of a certain age, Damon, The Monster Squad is nothing short of absolute legend, starring, as you mentioned, Andre Gower as Sean, Robbie Kiger as Patrick, Stephen Macht as Dell, Sean's dad, Duncan Regehr as Count Dracula, Tom Noonan as Frankenstein's monster, Brent Challam as Horace, Ryan Lambert as Rudy, and Ashley Bank as Phoebe. As you mentioned, written by Fred Decker and Shane Black, of course, and directed by Fred Decker. Wow, Damon. I can't begin to tell you. I don't know where to start. I'm so damn excited. But I'm going to tell you this. This is probably what tipped me into liking horror. Now, you and I have gone through our history with horror and how we've watched it too young and all that good stuff. But ultimately, what little kids like you and I needed was other kids in monstrous situations to go, I want to do what those kids are doing. And that's exactly what the Monster Squad was for you and me. Did you by chance, because I'm going to give you a sad statistic right now. Normally I talk about for older movies, their budget and their box office. Their budget was $12 million. Their box office was $3.7 million. This was a box office flop. It truly did find its audience on cable and in video stores long, long after it was in the theaters. By chance, in 1987, did little Damon Martin see this in the theater? There's no way, right?
No, I did not. I did not see this in theaters. But I do remember, and I can't remember if it was 87, 88, 89, right around that time. But I do remember going to the video store. And much like we've said many times on this podcast, the joy of the video store in those days was just looking at great VHS covers and saying, let's watch this movie. And Monster Squad had one of the most iconic covers of all time. As a matter of fact, just to kind of tease what I'm wearing right now, my Monster Squad T-shirt, which is obviously the cover of the VHS. The VHS caught my attention, and I was like, wow. And they're kids. And so I immediately remember renting it and watching it. And then it became like a monthly rental for me. Like I would just be like, what else is there? Oh, I want to watch the Monster Squad again. And I would rent it again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So no, sadly I never saw it in the theater, but when it came out on VHS, I watched it obsessively.
And for me, obviously I didn't see it in the theater either, because I think I was about 6 years old and I don't think anyone would have taken me to go see the Monster Squad. But what I did have, Damon, was a very crucial piece of my horror history, and that was I had a hot box. I had a cable box with illegal HBO on it. And that is crucial for a kid like me, because that's where I saw all my horror movies. I saw them on HBO. I saw them on Cinemax. The Monster Squad I found on HBO. And it played a lot. I mean, HBO would just play these things over and over and over again. So anytime it was on, I saw it. That turned into rentals. Eventually, somebody got a VHS copy of it. Somewhere down the line, it actually took a long while for there to be a physical copy of this. But we watched this movie over and over and over again as kids, because I grew up with The Goonies. I know you did too. The Goonies was a huge formative movie for us. It's just a straight kids adventure movie. These kids are going off and looking for treasure. This was very much like, these are kids, but they're not going off for treasure. They're going off to fight Dracula. and the Wolfman and Frankenstein. And if you're a kid like I was, who like, when I remember trouncing around like elementary school going, I want to be a werewolf. I want to be a werewolf when I grow up. That's literally, I was like that. And there was some other kid, I think his name was like Victor or something. He wanted to be a vampire. And we would just walk home from school pretending I was a werewolf and pretending he was a vampire. So when a movie like that comes out, you're just like, I found my thing. I found the thing that makes sense to this weird brain of mine. But yeah, Damon, that little box office, that paltry box office that this poor movie got has I think a twofold issue. One, if you've ever seen Wolfman Got Nards, which I've only seen for the first time the night before we recorded this podcast, the marketing on the Monster Squad was atrocious. I don't know who decided to do the marketing for Monster Squad. They didn't know how to sell this movie. What they should have been selling was Goonies fight monsters, and I think that would have gotten a lot more butts and seats. So they had a terrible, terrible marketing campaign. But another problem was just 2 weeks prior was another movie that you and I fawned over for 2.5 hours, and that was a movie called The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys came out, and those weren't little kids. They were teenagers, gorgeous teenagers who were vampires and cool as shit and rode motorcycles and drank and got in fights and all this. It was a fucking super cool movie, which I definitely saw before I ever saw the Monster Squad. That just chewed up the box office. Everybody was going to see The Lost Boys. Nobody cared about a little kid movie when The Lost Boys was there. It's like, oh, I could go see, the new Inside Out movie, or I could go see Furiosa. I wonder what I'm going to pick. You know what I mean? Like that's what was going on in 1987. So it had this twofold problem. But truth be told, Damon, this is amongst, and I've never bothered to try and rank this movie, but it is amongst what I consider the perfect films. It's 80s to a fault. I mean, it's an 80s corny movie at times, and there's certainly things that feel very dated about this movie, but it hits the emotional beats like very few movies know. And I think it is funny because you've seen Wolfman Got Nards, right? You've seen that documentary?
Yes, I have seen it. Yeah. I watched it again
Yeah.
a couple nights ago, just kind of refresh myself. Yeah.
To hear Shane Black, who is a prolific screenwriter and is a huge screenwriter in movie history, to know that he sort of freestyled this movie. He didn't put an outline together. He just kind of started writing it. He kind of like hashed it out in a couple of weeks. And you can use this movie to teach people how to write movies. That's how good it is. That's how good its pacing is. That's how good it is at its themes. That's how good it is at payoffs and setups and all of that good stuff. It's like a textbook in and of itself for how to write a great movie. And that's why I think, and Fred Decker himself says in that documentary, he goes, "This is the best movie I've ever directed. I can guarantee you that. It's my best work." Because it had this dynamite script about these kids who are obsessed with monsters, and shit, monsters show up on their fucking doorstep, Damon. What you gonna do?
Yeah, it is, as you said, it's a rare film that, listen, one of the things I love about our show is that we try to be as brutally honest with our audience as we can be about everything we do. And we've said this on the show before, not to rehash past episodes, but since it's the 200th episode, it seems befitting. But we've always said that, like, we're never going to just take the dollar for somebody who wants to promote something on our show, and then we're going to be dishonest with our audience and say, oh, it's awesome, when we didn't really enjoy it. I'll never do that.
No.
I'm not saying it's wrong to take money to be to get an ad or whatever the case may be. I'm certainly not begrudging anyone who does that. But in terms of our reviews, when we're reviewing a movie, we're going to give you our honest, unabashed opinions. We're never going to just fawn over something that we don't actually like, simply because somebody told us to, or there's even a person we like in it, or somebody we like directed it. We're going to be honest with you, brutally honest. Now, again, there are certainly movies we fawn over, but there are also movies we've been brutally honest and said they're not good. The Monster Squad, while I understand it is nostalgia for me, it is a movie that is a formative horror movie for me, because I had seen horror movies before Monster Squad. I remember seeing Nightmare on Elm Street 2 when I was very little, and I had no business seeing that movie. But the difference was with Monster Squad was when I saw Monster Squad for the first time. I don't remember exactly how old I was, 7, 8 years old, but I was relative age-wise to the kids in the movie. So I related to them. I could be Sean. I could be Patrick. I could be Horace. That's what did it. That's what did it. So it connects. So this is, in my opinion, one of those rare instances where I really can't offer much critical analysis because this is a perfect film. And speaking of which, I didn't tease this at the beginning of the episode, Patrick, but just to kind of throw this out there, we talked about how this film really did not do well at the box office. And you're absolutely right. The marketing was atrocious. And we're going to give criticism to anyone. It's the marketing department for New Line Cinema for this movie because that was, whoo boy. But this film became, even though Fred Decker butts up against the word, because he talks about that in the documentary, he doesn't like the whole cult classic, which I don't really know why you don't like it as a cult classic. It is. But this is a movie that picked up steam years later and then became just a fan favorite. There was a demand for the DVD to get made. Now they've got it out in 4K. They did a tour a few years ago for the 30th anniversary, and they did actors. They went all around the theaters all over the United States and all over the world and did, reunions and things like that. And now people are they're feverishly in love with the Monster Squad. As a special addition to our 200th episode, if you stay tuned till the end, hopefully you don't fast forward, stay tuned to the end. We have a very, very special interview for you all. I had the honor of speaking to the guy who I believe is the definitive Count Dracula, Duncan Regehr, who is the star, of course, played Dracula in the Monster Squad. He sat down with me and reminisced over this movie, the release, his casting, his audition, filming the movie, everything. We went through a whole deep dive on his process of becoming Dracula, and you will hear that interview with Duncan Regehr at the end of the episode, my conversation. Sadly, Patrick, you couldn't make it, so it's it's a one-on-one with me and Duncan, but boy, was I cheesing. Like, I'm a professional. I do interviews for a living. This is what I do for a living. But boy, was I cheesing out in my head, man. I was geeking out pretty hard. So we'll have that interview with Duncan later in the show.
That is awesome. I'm fully jealous, but there was no way I could make that commitment. We do live incredibly busy lives, the two of us, and it just did not line up with my schedule. Much to my regret, but I knew Damon Martin would do us proud and do our fans proud. And we got what also I believe is the best Dracula I've ever seen on film. And I've seen them all. I've seen all the Draculas. There is something about Duncan Regehr's performance that is truly haunting. And it's funny. We just talked about on our 199th episode, the movie The Watchers, and we were kind of having trouble finding motivation for everybody. The Monster Squad, it simplifies everything. Whereas a movie like The Watchers was so complicated, it gets lost in its own ideas and its own different things. I love what the Monster Squad does is it sets you up with this epic cold open, by the way. This fantastic cold open that explains that Dr. Van Helsing and his crew of madmen are going on the hunt for Dracula to stop him from creating hell on Earth. And I love that this cool blood red crawl is going over the screen. It's very serious. And then at the very end of that crawl, as they're explaining, they go, they screwed up.
No, they blew it. They blew it.
Oh, they blew it. They blew it. Excuse me. They blew it. Yes, they blew it. I know. I had it written down somewhere and I didn't want to read it. They blew it, which is a lovely little twist on this. And it sets the scene so quickly. It sets the scene that, yes, there is this lore that you're going to get. And it's also they blew it, lets you know it's also going to be funny. You're also going to have fun tonight. This incredible cold open with effects done by the great Stan Winston. And we're going to pour over his accomplishments here in just a little bit. Starts with Van Helsing having a showdown with Dracula and things go wrong. They blow it. And then it gets right into present day 1986 or whatever it is. And these kids who are obsessed with monsters and their mom, played by the mom from the Goonies, by the way. That was not a mistake. They literally were like, we need to make a Goonies with the monsters. So let's just cast the mom from the Goonies and she'll play the mom of these kids. She goes to a yard sale on Shadowbrook Road and picks up a book for her son who loves monsters. Well, that book just happens to be all the perfect incantations to open up limbo to trap evil forever, or if they can destroy the damn amulet, Dracula can make hell on earth. And that's it. That's it. We know what the kids want, we know what Dracula wants, and we know that they're going to collide. And from then on, it's just fun, it's action, it's comedy, it's perfect timing. There's a little bit of like side drama, and it all culminates in like this beautiful showdown with the kids and the monsters. And there was something that really hit me like a ton of bricks when I was watching it on this last viewing. There's real stakes. These kids are in real danger. Dracula, why we consider Duncan Regehr like the best Dracula ever, he wants to fucking kill these kids. And he's nasty about it. He's mean about it. And Duncan Regehr even says, he goes, my approach was to be completely sociopathic. And that hit me on this last viewing. I was like, you're right. He has a diabolical obsession with this book. He's pissed off about being beaten in the past, and he does not care that he's going to lay waste to children. He will coldly do it. That's some heavy fucking shit. That's really heavy for a kids movie. It's a kids movie, and Dracula is like, fuck those kids. I want to fucking kill those kids. Like, you're like, holy shit, it's insane. But the movie's still fun. It doesn't lose its sense of fun. It doesn't lose any of its sense of adventure and wonder. And you as a kid want to fight Dracula, even though he's the coldest fucking Dracula you've ever fucking seen. Like all these little pieces come together to create something that I think is one of the more fun movies that I'll ever have watched. And I've shown it to my kids, Damon, you know this. I've shown it to my kids. They instantly took to it because of what you said earlier. They go, hey, those kids are fighting Dracula and the Wolfman. I want to do that too. Now they walk around with Monster Squad t-shirts, and they might be the only kids at their school that do that. And it's a testament to simple, real stakes and lots of fun. And I don't know, Dan, do you have anything to pour over? Because I could do this all night.
Well, to your point, this is something I want to talk about anyways, and this is something I brought up with Duncan, and you'll hear in our interview. I called his performance when I spoke to him, I called it deliciously evil. Because there's just this, like, charisma, this swagger to the way he presents Dracula, but he's also evil as fuck. And something that Fred Decker said about his approach to this movie, and again, he said he was influenced by Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which sounds like a really goofy movie to think about. But he said that what made him really stand up and enjoy that movie is that Abbott and Costello were comedic characters. They were very goofy and funny. But then Frankenstein's monster in the movie was played straight. It wasn't goofy or funny. It was a monstrous machine. And he's like, that's a really interesting dynamic, kind of a dichotomy of these two kind of characters that, like, you have these comedic characters bumping up against, like, a real creature. And this creature is not there to be funny. You know, they're not putting, funny hats on him. He's not falling over and laughing. Like, they're doing this seriously. And so that was a big part of making this movie, is that there's real peril for these kids. I actually brought this up to Duncan, not to keep talking about the interview, but and I'll bring this up to you, and we're going to lose half our audience right now, and I apologize for doing this early in the show, but I'm going to lose half our audience right here. I love The Goonies. One of my favorite kid movies growing up. As much as I love The Goonies, the kids in that movie, while, they're down in the well and they're underground, the Fratellis, the family they're going up against, Anne Ramsey, Joe Pantoliano, that family, they're kind of goofy. Yeah. Like, they're kind of like they're kind of like, jackass villains. Like, there's a reason why they got put in jail, and they're not the brightest criminals in the world. And even though, like, when they're in the restaurant and obviously, we know that, that one kid gets tied up and all these different things that happen. I never watched The Goonies and thought, man, these kids are in real serious danger, because the people they were going up against were kind of goofy. Like, and I think that's the point. That's the point. Like, they were never putting these kids in, like, serious harm's way,
Well, Well, the only thing I would counter, because I'm actually kind of agreeing with you, is that they try in moments in the Goonies to show how serious the Fratellis are. The kids bump into the dead body that was shot and killed
Yeah.
in the ice cream freezer. Mama Fratelli wants to blend Chunk's fingers to get him to talk. Like, they are serious criminals, but that movie couldn't find the balance, which is what the Monster Squad does find. So, I mean, continue. I just wanted to kind of counter that a little bit. They
Yeah, but I
tried
mean,
in the Goonies, but they didn't have the balance.
but even when they tried, it almost felt goofy. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it's a wrong thing. It's a kids' movie. Of course, I understand why they do that. Like, they're trying to make you think, yeah, they're in peril. But I never, in any moment, did I ever truly feel like these kids were in serious danger. It was almost like, it was almost like they're threatening them, but they would never actually do it. And these characters were so goofy and dumb. You're like, yeah, you're the kind of guy who, like, you're the kind of guy who robs a bank and then waves at the security cameras you're leaving, like, oh, they saw my face, shit, I guess I'm gonna get caught. Like, they're those kind of criminals. They're not masterminds. The difference with the Monster Squad is that the villains, the creatures, the bad guys in this movie, they're truly villainous. They're truly evil. Dracula is ready to kill these kids and says it. And when he blows up the treehouse and he's outside the Crenshaw's house and he says, "I will have your son." You're like, oh shit! Like, and of course, listen. We're going to talk about it later. The icon. This is my favorite moment. This is the moment in the movie where I was like, oh man, like, this is real. Like, these kids are in serious danger. Is, of course, the moment when Dracula picks up Phoebe and says, "Give me the amulet, you bitch." To a 5-year-old girl, "Give me the amulet, you bitch." Hisses at her. Shit.
Nothing nice about this Dracula.
That was real stakes. And I think that's what separates the Monster Squad from so many other kids' horror movies, is that there's real peril here. There's real danger here. These monsters, particularly Dracula, led by Dracula, and of course even the Wolfman, and I mean, obviously to a lesser extent the Gill Man and and the Mummy, but they're not there to play around. This is not like a goofy, like, we're going to go on a pirate ship and you're going to walk the plank and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna cut your throats and bleed you out and
we'll eat you. We're gonna kill you. We're gonna light a dynamite into your clubhouse and blow it up. Hopefully you're inside. Like, they don't fuck around.
And like that scene when the Wolfman escapes and he calls Sean's dad and he said, "He's gonna kill your son." They're not playing around. I think that, to me, as a kid, I related to the kids because I'm like, ooh, I could be one of these kids. But on the flip side, the danger was real. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what truly separated the Monster Squad from every other kids movie that I saw at that point, because I, of course, adored The Lost Boys, and it remains one of my favorite films of all time. When I saw that, I was 7, 8 years old. They were teenagers, almost 18. I couldn't quite relate to them. I loved it. Yeah. I wanted to be them later in life, but I wasn't.
You wanted to grow up to be the Lost Boys.
I was Sean. I was Patrick. I was Horace. I was reading comic books, and I love monster movies. I love horror films. That was me, of basically that age. And then to have that on top of that, then you're injecting my age group with Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers coming after me, which doesn't really, even in those movies, that doesn't really happen. Like, yeah, there's little kids in some of those movies, but generally speaking, it's teens and adults who are being stalked by the slashers. It took till
part 4 of Friday the 13th before a kid got involved. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, so it's almost like seeing that real peril for these kids, that was something totally different for me at that point. And the fact that every one of the characters, minus Frankenstein's monster, who kind of becomes befriended by the kids and kind of, again, it's meant to be a different character when we actually find out, his true soul, or however you want to say it.
Yeah.
But Dracula is not there to fuck around. He's not there to play around and he's there to gut you, drink your blood, get the amulet and fuck shit up. And that was just a totally different dynamic than anything I'd ever seen at that point in my life. And I think that's also why this movie continues to resonate, because even today, Patrick, now I'm not saying I don't watch a lot of kids movies. You probably have a much better insight than I do, because you have to watch kids movies. You have kids. But I've not really seen many outside of that. Like, I would say, and I'll say this now, and I think you'll agree with me. You don't get Stranger Things without Monster Squad, because in Stranger Things, it feels like there are real stakes.
Yeah.
I think at least some part of the DNA of that comes from the Monster Squad, because this was a movie where 12-year-old kids had stakes. Now, did any of them die in the movie? Did any of them get gutted or have their throats slashed? No. But there was never a moment in the Monster Squad where you didn't think that could happen. And that's the difference. I never felt that way in a lot of other kids' movies. I never felt my lead characters were really in danger. Maybe they get caught or whatever. Never did I think, oh yeah, they're going to get their necks bitten off by Dracula. This movie had genuine peril built in for these kids, and that was totally different.
What a setup, too, that this movie is, because really, like, it takes a minute for Dracula to appear, but who do you get first? You get Dracula's herald, which is the Wolfman. Oh, God, played by what's his name? I have to mention
John Gryers. John Gryers. Who you could actually argue ended up having the biggest career out of anybody in this film.
Anybody, right? Yes, he's Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite and many other things.
He was just in the White Lotus these last two seasons.
Right. That's right. He was in the last two seasons of White Lotus. And also, he was in one of my favorite 80s films, Real Genius. He played Laszlo in Real Genius, and I fucking loved him. But the important thing for Monster Squad is that John Gry's character, the Wolfman, was the herald. Something is coming for your kids. And how do they do it, right? He's in a police station, and Sean's dad happens to be a cop. So this is happening right over his dad's shoulder. He's going, I'm a Wolfman, you gotta lock me up. He's freaking out. What happens? A deputy shoots him dead. This is a kid's movie. This is how we open the movie. With a man who's crazed, who throws a guy through a window. Like an incredible stunt, you know what I mean? Like real harrowing, heavy shit that you normally see in like an action thriller of the 1980s. And then he fires a gun in the air and goes, "Lock me up!" And then a deputy just guns him down. They wheel his bloody body into an ambulance, and then just moments later, when the full moon is exposed, the feet, the claws start to come out, the hair starts to grow, the body starts to move under the bloody blanket in the gurney, and the innocent ambulance driver or coroner is attacked by a ravenous Wolfman and killed. You're going, oh, this is fucked. Like this like these monsters are coming to kill, which is like, when do you do that in a kids movie? You never do. There's another universally loved kids, I say kids, but what preteen, whatever, movie where the stakes are just as high. In fact, they even go a step higher. And that's a movie that you and I have talked about called Attack the Block. Attack the Block, a fantastic movie. And I think anyone who's ever watched it goes, yeah, Attack the Block's the shit. Some of those kids fucking die. Those aliens don't give a fuck. They don't care what's in front of them. They have their goals, and they will kill fucking kids. And they do in that movie. And you have to think a movie like Attack the Block was influenced by this, because they were like, cool, that was a cool movie about these kids in America fighting these monsters. Let's do that here in England. And let's just go one fucking step further, because fuck it. Let's see how it goes. That's also one of the best fucking horror movies I've ever seen. I love Attack the Block, and it has the DNA, very much the DNA of Monster Squad. Even though this movie, and Fred Decker says it himself, he goes, it took me 30 years to know anybody even fucking liked it. I didn't even know for 30 years. But all that time, all those horror weirdos growing up, and there's so many of them that they show in that Wolfman Got Nards documentary, but a lot of those people became horror directors. They talked to a few in there. And you see the DNA of the Monster Squad in everything that came after it. even the pulpy and the fun pulp and comedy of that movie lives on in more modern horror stuff. I think of Josh Rubin and his sense of humor. You know, Josh Rubin knows the Monster Squad back and forth and could probably recite the entire movie to you, and he'll probably do a great job. It'd probably be a great one-man show to watch Josh Rubin, director of Werewolves Within, do an entire performance of Monster Squad as a one-man show. It is ingrained in the DNA of great horror that is out now, that is happening right now. It's a seminal film. It's completely it's a cornerstone of horror that happened.
Another thing I love, you mentioned the Wolfman. I don't want to get too far off topic here, but we talked about how delicious, I call it deliciously evil, that Dracula was, because everything, every word that Duncan Regehr utters in this film is just like, it's perfect. And I'm not
God.
saying, it's just
I
everything
want to
he
talk about
delivers.
that too. Yeah,
Yeah,
tee this up because I want to talk about that.
and we talked about him being the definitive Dracula. And again, I'm saying, I've said this, so you can go back. I don't remember what episodes we've talked about this before, but I've 100% said he's my Dracula. Like, I understand, certainly appreciate what Bela Lugosi did with the role. I certainly love what Christopher Lee did with the role. I love those Hammer films from the 60s and 70s. But to me, Duncan Regehr is the definitive Dracula. His Dracula is the scariest, most defined Dracula for me personally. But on the Wolfman side, I love the costume. We'll talk about Stan Winston and his team's designs, which was incredible. But one thing I really loved about this movie was how they played into it being a curse. This wasn't
Yes.
a guy who wanted to be a Wolfman. This guy was fighting with everything in his power to not be a Wolfman. And so when he shows up at the police station, he's like, "You gotta he's gonna, they're gonna, he's coming."
He's
for
warning the guy. Yeah,
He's warning the guy, and he's like, "Lock me up," and he gets shot. And then later, when he breaks loose of the, gives him all the sleeping pills, ties him up, he breaks loose, runs out, and he, goes to the phone once again, trying to warn them. And he's like, "He's gonna kill your son." And then even in the ending, when Rudy shoots him and he goes, "Thank you," and he dies, that's all he wants. He doesn't want to. I loved that portrayal of the Wolfman. That this guy was cursed with being a Wolfman. When he transformed into Wolfman, he didn't want to. That was his curse. I loved the way he played that, because so often you think of just like, well, they're bad guys, they're bad guys. Weirdly, two bad guys in this movie are specifically layered. Frankenstein, who is arguably the biggest, scariest monster of them all, ends up being befriended by a little 5-year-old girl and kind of falls, he's like, it's his friend. And then the Wolfman, while the Wolfman in his fullest form is terrifying and a holy terror, the man living inside the beast does not want to be him. That's fantastically layered characters as your monsters. Which you really, again, you think about kind of one-note characters, and we talked about, like, when we talked about 90s movies, we talked about this with The Crow, like, Top Dollar, who we loved, he was just this, like, over-the-top, swagger-filled villain. There was no redeeming qualities about him, but there was just something so, like, charismatic about him. And we talked about that with, Hans Gruber and Die Hard and different movies like this. Weirdly, Monster Squad was like ahead of its game as far as what we see now with like layered villains.
yes.
A couple of these villains in particular were actually pretty layered. Now, of course, Dracula was, just completely sociopathic and evil, as he should be as the leader. But weirdly, they actually had layers to the villains, which is odd. Like, you don't typically see that in a montage kind of film like this.
This is where I learned that being the Wolfman was a curse. Because I told you before that, I was like, "Oh, I want to be a werewolf. I want to be a werewolf." I was this little kid who wanted to be a werewolf. This was the first time I saw that the werewolf was a curse, and I understood as a little kid. I was like, "Of course he doesn't want to be this." Like that, to be able to convey that to like a 7, 8-year-old kid, and go, "Oh yeah, it makes sense that being a werewolf is a curse. To be this bloodthirsty creature of the night, he hates it." And he wants to die. It's so terrible. He's happy to be lifted from the curse through death. incredibly deep concept to teach a child. But it's like it's just a weird way to like it's weird that they were so sophisticated, that Shane Black and Fred Decker were so sophisticated to know, like, you don't want to be these guys, kids. You don't even want to be Frankenstein. He, as much as Frankenstein was a sweet, caring monster, like, he was tortured. He's really nice to the kids, and they bring him up to the clubhouse somehow. And then, while he's up there, they show him like their mask, and they go, "Look, oh, here's a Frankenstein mask." And he looks at it and he realizes he's a hideous monster. This is how they see him, and it makes him sad. And you put layers on him, and you go, it's just genius. And it hit me all the way back then. He wasn't even reluctantly a bad guy. He was just reanimated. He had no choice in the matter. And so you understood his journey, and it broke your heart when he loses grip of Phoebe and gets swallowed into the limbo. You go, oh no, like he found his people. He found the people who didn't judge him for what he looked like, because he probably went through millennia where he was being chased by pitchforks and shit like that. Now he found people who just loved him for who he was, and he ends up losing them in the end. There's like tragedy to that. Sophisticated shit, like really sophisticated for a kid's movie. And you're not wrong when you say this is better than like the Goonies. I love the Goonies. I literally almost bought the Goonies house, inside baseball here. It was up for sale, and my house was worth the exact same amount. And I was nearly like, babe, we're selling our house and we're buying the Goonies house, and I'll figure out what to do with my life living in Astoria, Oregon. I'll figure it out, but I have to live in the Goonies house. So I still love the Goonies, but this is a more sophisticated story. There's so many other incredible layers to how you understand these characters and how they all interact in this world with these innocent kids who are put in an incredibly crazy situation. And you mentioned a magic word there, Damon, that I want to pivot to: montage. I had to think. I go, is it people of a certain age who love the montage? Because this is one for the ages. Dracula, as we have mentioned, is hell-bent on destroying the world, bringing hell to earth. And he realizes when he lands in this little small town that all he's got to do is go kill some kids and get his book, and he's done. So in his mind, he goes, this is just an evening's worth of work. And he tees up what is one of my favorite montages of all time, but he tees it up with this great line. He goes, "Soon the creatures of the night will rule the world, and there is no one to stop us." And like he's screaming, and then it's cue the music, and it's rock until you drop. And then and like every time a montage hits like that, and it's a very musical, lyrical thing where it's just like that crescendo of screaming, no one's going to stop us. Yes, someone's going to stop you, and we're going to show you how they're going to stop you. I was like, this is almost a lost art. I don't know, and I want to hear from the fans, because I'm sure some of the fans that listen to us have probably never seen the Monster Squad. Go see it. You can see it. It's free on streaming. Just go look for it. It's out there, or go purchase the 4K. Do montages do for you what it does for guys like Damon and myself, and people of a certain age who just fucking love montages? Because I absolutely adore that. And the way it hits off of his scream, and not only just hits, it goes into a relevant montage. No one's going to stop us. Yes, someone's going to stop you. Here they are, and I'm showing you how they're going to do it. It's something that is, I think, almost lost in time.
It's really the perfect encapsulation of this movie in a lot of ways, because when you say that, when no one's going to stop us, and it kicks right into the alarm, waking up Sean, him hitting the alarm and jumping up, getting dressed, and then heading out. And the rest of that day is them preparing to battle the creatures of the night. It's them waiting for the final bell to ring so they can get out of school. It's Rudy making the stakes and the silver bullet and stealing the archery set. It's them discovering where Shadowbrook Road is and where they need a map to go to the house. And they even stick in Phoebe playing dress up with Frankenstein just to show that sweet relationship. It's everything. And then Eugene writing the Dear Army guys, monsters are here. All those little, it's just like it's all the things that you would see them doing, like preparation, getting ready for this battle that would be that night. and just like it was just so perfectly encapsulated by, and of course that song that I played at the beginning, the rock until you drop, yeah, dance until your heart stops. But it's just like and then like by the end of that, you're set up for like the final act. It's like literally the perfect transition. Getting them, I can only honestly. I love a great montage. The only other movie I can think of, and this isn't a horror movie, of course, the only other movie I can think of that has a montage of this level that, like, when I watch it, I just get pumped up. And it's Rocky IV.
Yeah,
when,
right. Yeah.
When he's in Russia and he starts training, you hear that great, that da-da-da, da-da-da, and you see Drago training, you see Rocky training, and then it crescendos into their fight in Russia. It's very much to say that's what a montage does. You're leading into the final act. And that's what this does. It gets you set up. They're all battle ready, gearing up. And then as soon as it ends, the song ends, it's nighttime and it's ready to go fight the monsters. And then it leads into this great third act, which is leading into the final 20 minutes, which Fred Decker has said is the greatest thing he's ever shot. That final sequence, the battle sequence, but that montage sets it up perfectly. And I of course, getting ready for the podcast, I made a special intro with that song. You can't hear that song and not feel good because it's just like that forever lives in infamy as the montage song for the Monster Squad. But it sets up that third act so perfectly because it gives you everything you need to know about what these kids are doing to get ready. The silver bullets, the wooden stakes, the archery set, knowing where Shadowbrook Road is, the whole thing. And then when it ends, fight is on. It's just it is literally the perfect transition from a second to a third act in a movie.
And they do a great job into that transition into the third act of saying, like, guess what? We're glad you prepared, but you are out fucking gunned. Like, you are, like, again, they reiterate the stakes, which is, it's so fucking genius because once the kids, they descend on the Shadowbrook Lane or whatever it is, Shadowbrook Road, to get the amulet. That goes horribly wrong. Like Frankenstein is almost immediately indisposed, which he was their big muscle. He was their big protector. He's almost immediately indisposed. They're chased down by Dracula's brides, who are terrifying. The Wolfman is now fully cursed and like out for blood, and there's nothing to stop him now. This curse has completely taken hold of him. And Dracula is right on their fucking asses, and he's down to fucking kill. And they understand that in that moment. And then, Damon, scary German guy picks them up and fucking is trying to take them back into town, and the mummy tries to kill them, and they have a great scene with the mummy. And then they get into town, and in that town square is a showdown to end all showdowns, right? While the montage is going on, Patrick's job is to find the virgin for some, and they believe the virgin to be his older sister. They turn out to be wrong. But when they get to town and she starts to read the incantation, it does not work. So that's like the false victory. You're like, cool, we got everything we needed. We even got the amulet. We even got away from Dracula back at Shadowbrook Road. She's going to read the thing. We're going to open up Limbo. Bam, we're ready to go. Nope, it doesn't work. And right as it doesn't work, Dracula comes to town square. He fucking kills Detective Sapper, like brutally kills him, blows him up in a car. So you're right away like, oh, he doesn't fuck around, clearly. Then, Wolfman is descending, killing people. He tries to kill Sean's dad. They have a false victory killing him, which is really great. It's like one of the most incredible fucking Wolfman kills I've ever fucking seen in a movie. The great Stan Winston. We'll get to him in a second. And then you got Horace fighting the fucking Gill Man, Rudy fighting the brides of Dracula. Like, when I'm saying this, it sounds like a giant Game of Thrones saga. It's kids in a town square. And then finally they figure out, fuck, this whole fucking time we've had a virgin. The one we won't let into the Monster Squad, little sweet Phoebe, who's been taking care of Frankenstein this whole time. Of course she's a virgin. And Scary German Guy can help her read the incantation, and we can open fucking Limbo. So she starts to do that. Sweet little Phoebe, just a little tiny cute, the cutest little 5-year-old girl, trying to incant some German, that's its own crazy irony of tone, and stalking her down is Duncan fucking Regehr, the scariest Dracula you've ever seen, who has shown you that he doesn't give a fuck. He's going to kill anyone in his way. He mows down every motherfucker, and he's going to make a fucking slow beeline straight for a 5-year-old girl. And you're like, well, he can't possibly do anything, right? We have to stop him before that point. Picks her up by the fucking face, as evil as can fucking be, with that amulet shining on his face and the classic lighting on his face. And he says, give me the amulet, you bitch. And he hisses at her and the fucking fangs come out and the eyes go red. And you're like, oh my God, he's gonna kill Phoebe. That's insanity. And then right then and there, Frankenstein reemerges. He finally got himself out of the rubble. He finally got there to save the day just in time. Fucking throws Dracula off her. Dracula lands on the metal, on the wrought iron gate or whatever. You think he's done another false victory. False victory's so important in a movie like this. And they think they're all good. And they open up limbo and they start sucking all the evil in. All the evil is flying in. But Dracula will not go down without a fight. He has got to kill a kid. He's like so obsessed with killing a kid. He takes Sean. Sean heroically finds a stake, hits him in the fucking heart, and sends him up. Van Helsing comes out of limbo and is like, gives him a fucking thumbs up. Like, holy shit, the beats in this movie are so fucking heroic. This is like, if you've never seen The Monster Squad, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, what are they going on about? Another fucking 80s movie? Like, I'm a 90s kid. I want Scream. Okay, cool. Like, trust me, that's great too. But you have to see how this fucking sequence goes down. And then, Damon, they break our hearts as Frankenstein gets sucked away. And it's Phoebe, no, and all that stuff. Fucking fantastic movie. And then at the end, what happens, Damon? The army finally shows up. Eugene's only job was to call the army. They show up late when everything's done. Who the hell are you guys? And then everyone crowds around and they're like, we're the Monster Squad. Because they are now.
Hold on.
Oh, what did I miss?
He says, well, who the hell's got something to say? He's like, well, I can tell you, sir. And he's like, well, who are you? And he goes, hands him the card. He goes, we're the Monster Squad. And that's where we get into the beat. That's what he says. He's like,
what's so fucking rad about that is that they earned being the Monster Squad.
Yeah.
Like, they had this insane showdown, this insane lead up, and this insane fight. So, like, they were just kids before that. And now they can look the army in the face and go, we are the Monster Squad. We fucking took on evil and won. It's a masterclass in how to earn your victory.
And also, one thing that I think this movie does so brilliantly, because these kids are still kids enough to believe in monsters, so they believe monsters are real. Because throughout the entire film, none of the adults believe it's real. You know, lock me up. They shoot him. He's gone. Mummy disappears from the museum. They're not believing it.
2,000-year-old dead guys don't get up and walk away, and then cut to a 2,000-year-old dead guy walking away. Fantastic.
And when the Wolfman calls Sean's dad, he's like, he's gonna kill your son. He just hangs up. It's not until he goes to his house and Dracula shows up and blows up the fucking treehouse and says, I will have your son. He literally watches him transform into a bat, and he's like, oh, maybe this shit is real. Oh, what's going on here? But the one thing that I loved, and I'll be the first to admit, when I was a little kid seeing this movie for the first time, I don't remember how old I was, 7, 8 years old, whatever it was. The one thing I didn't understand at the time was the introduction of Scary German Guy. Because he's the neighborhood old guy that everyone's afraid of. We all had those guys in our neighborhood. You know what I'm talking about. The reality is, now, you know, sadly, we live in a world now where there are really creepy people living around neighborhoods. But in those days in the 80s, like, you always had that one house you're kind of scared of. And I would say, you know, by and large in small towns, which is where I'm from. You grew up in a big city. I grew up in a small town. They weren't scary. You built it up in your head that they were scary. It's like when they used to say, like, scary German guy, he saw us, he was watching us, and they'll run away. They all think he's like a vampire, he's a freak. And then, you know, at one point, I think Shawnee goes, he's just a dude on welfare. And then when they need the German translated in Van Helsing's diary, and they show up at his house, and Horace has that great line, he's like, I got 3 words for you: scary German guy, and he goes, and the one guy goes, well, how do you say please don't murder us in German? And then he shows up behind him and goes, "Würden die uns
Yeah.
nicht?" And they're like, oh shit. And then they go in the house, you find out he's the sweetest, oldest, just sweet guy. And then again, this is where I said I didn't understand this as a
Yeah.
kid, because I was
This
a
I
kid.
know what you're talking about. This went
Yeah.
over my head too.
But this was such a sophisticated element to add to this movie, because when they have a great moment when they're leaving and he goes, "You thought I was a vampire, right?" And no, 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 it's okay. And they're because he's helping them curb their fears about him.
Yeah.
And he says, "But if I was a vampire, I wouldn't see my reflection in the mirror, would I?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's true. Holy shit, you do." He's like, "You sure do know a lot about monsters." He goes, "Now that you say so, I believe I do." And he closes the door, and you realize he was a Holocaust survivor. Now, when I was 7, 8 years old, I had no fucking clue what that was. I was like,
Went
what?
way
Huh?
over my head. Yeah, I had no idea what it meant.
But looking back now, the sophistication of adding that little element in and saying that this guy survived the Holocaust, he goes, "You sure do know about a lot about monsters." Now that you say it, yeah, I do. Because he did. He knows the
Yeah.
real monsters. He survived the most atrocious, awful, horrific monsters in potentially mankind's history.
Yeah.
That is such a huge element, because again, it went over my head as a kid, and I understand this is a kid's horror film, but it went over my head. But now, years later, that I've watched this movie 100 times, that is such a sophisticated moment in there, and such a beautiful little moment for that character, because he's the scary guy in the neighborhood. No one wants to visit him. No one wants to see him. Everyone runs from his house when he peeks out the window. Then you find out he's this sweet old man who has cherry pie, and he's just like the nicest guy in the world. And he wants to do nothing but help them, which he does for the rest of the movie. He becomes one of the Monster Squad. He's the one adult who believes these children, because he has personal experience with monsters of a different variety, but horrible monsters. And that scene, looking back now, when I watch it a couple nights ago for like the 108th time, that's just such a scene that hits me every time. So I'm like, damn, what a great little element to add to the movie that, again, whenever my head as a kid, but now as an adult when I rewatch it. And that's kind of the point of this movie, like years later, like people just love to revisit this movie. It's a movie that people live with forever. You see that moment, you're like, wow, that's powerful. It's really powerful that they added
Super
just
powerful.
a little super little tiny element. And he goes, "I suppose I do." And you're like, oh shit, man, he really did. He's the one who knew the real monsters. And when he's facing off with Dracula, when Dracula comes up, he's shaking, he's scared, but he tries to shake off with Dracula, and he calls him Nosferatu, and he hits him with that bolt of like light, whatever surge or whatever, and he knocks him down. But that's him facing his fears. That's him facing down what he probably faced in the Holocaust when he was a child. That scene, he's just like, he's shaking, he's scared, but he's like, fuck it, I've faced real evil, I'll do it again. And Dracula knocks him down. But that guy, he's the adult who believes them the entire time. When he reads Van Helsing's diary, he's on the team. And even when he picks him up in the car, he's like, maybe we should go back to my house for some pie. He's just like, he's trying to, he wants the world to go back to normal, but he knows it's not normal. But I love that character, and I love the injection of that character, because we all had that kind of neighborhood person that we're all like afraid of for no reason. We had no reason.
Yeah, when you're just little kids and you don't know the world. Yeah.
But then they make him such an integral part of the story, and you realize he's he's kind of like the yin and the yang in a good way, of like Frankenstein. Like, he's like the other side of that, where like they think he's a monster. He's not. He's the sweetest old man. He ends up he's a key to the whole thing happening, the whole story concluding.
They couldn't have done it without him. Yeah.
Yeah. Without him, Phoebe doesn't read the incantation, and they don't blow a hole limbo. And then, obviously a Frankenstein who has that great line in the house when he says, "Master is near. Master wants children dead." And you're like, oh, shit. But they befriend him. And so it's like these two characters who are kind of built as like the scary people. They're not. They're like the sweetest people and the most helpful people in the entire movie.
It's something that I know you and I learned, and they drilled into our heads when we were kids, is you don't judge a book by its cover. Like, that was something that was drilled into us from a very young age, is that you're not supposed to judge people by how you perceive them. You need to get to know somebody before you judge them. And this movie reiterates that to kids. This movie's aimed at children. And so it's like, yeah, you know the scary person that lives in your neighborhood, but are you scared of them because they've done something to you, or are you just scared? You have to be able to think that. You have to separate that out and understand if it actually is the case or not. And so that was one of those great lessons from that time period. But you're talking about the sophistication. It's all over this movie. For a fun-loving romp of a movie that is very simple, that is very lean. If you're even thinking about writing a screenplay, start here. Start with the Monster Squad and watch how the story unfolds simply and effectively. It's a very simple movie. It's so simple. It's so straightforward. There's a couple of things in there where you go, well, wait a minute, why did that happen? Or why did that? And they're not that big of a deal. And it's not really important in a kid's movie anyway. Those aren't the things you get hung up on because kids are really just reacting to the world that's happening in front of them. But the story beats and the character development of all the characters, even the side characters, even the characters that aren't the main characters at all, even the bullies, even Sean's mom and dad, all these characters get their their background set up efficiently, quickly, in a fun way, in an entertaining way that doesn't have to say a lot. I mean, a masterclass, a pure masterclass.
Can we talk about sophistication? We talk about like the serious elements and how the creatures, the monsters in this movie play it straight. Like they're not there to fuck around. They're not there to make humor, jokes. Like Dracula has some deliciously evil lines, but he doesn't have any humor lines. You're never like, ha ha,
No.
Dracula, you're funny. But can we, real quick, we got to talk about the humor in this movie because it is great. And also, when I say sophisticated, the humor in this movie is sophisticated because a lot of times in kids' movies, and I remember watching kids' movies when I was growing up. Of course, I laughed at kids' movies. I mean, that's what they're built for. I liked them just as much as the next one. But the humor in this movie was almost a little bit beyond their years, but of that perfect like puberty age.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is like the opening joke. Like, there's just so many great funny jokes. Like the great moment when the very beginning of the movie after the cold open, when Sean and Patrick are in the principal's office and he's like talking them down, dressing them down for not paying attention in science class and drawing monsters. And he goes, the key here, boys, is science is real. Monsters are not. And he goes, we don't know that, sir. Just like, and then they walk out and they bump into Mrs. Carlson, the science teacher who they call Meow Mix. And he's like, Sean, the guys call her Meow Mix because her head's shaped like a cat. But I don't, sir, because how rude. But when they bump into her and you see her, and you're like, oh, she does look like a cat. And then they're walking away, hear him go, meow, meow. He goes, she's married. Oh my God. Some priest married her and it's okay with him? Like just those little jokes that are just like, that's things that of like that age, that 12, almost puberty age kids would make. Like kind of inappropriate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we all
yeah.
did. We all cursed and said things we probably shouldn't have said. That when he's like, some guy kisses her at night and he goes, a priest married her and that's okay with him? Like that's the humor. It's just really funny. And just like the moment when they pull in Sean's Patrick's sister into the treehouse, and he's like, "Have you?" Or he's like, "Are you a virgin?" And she's like, "What?" He's like, and then he goes, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah. I just want to know to the extent of which you have or have not been dorked." It's just like, but just like all the humor of that, of all those moments where it's like kind of adult-ish, but not like over the line, never crude. You know what I mean? Never crude, but it's in that borderline of that puberty age humor where it's like you're not laughing at Three Stooges jokes anymore or like goofy fall down, goofy comedy, but you're also not going full on like, The Hangover or
Right.
American Pie. It's like that in between where it's kind of inappropriate but doesn't go over the line.
It's inappropriate, but also you don't know how to use it, which is very much what these kids are. Like they know these words and they know what these things are, but they don't really know them in true context, so they use them out of context, and it's goofy and silly. Another piece of the humor that I fucking adore in this movie are the sight gags. The sight gags in this movie are amazing, and probably the best sight gag in the entire movie is monsters in my closet. So, Eugene is at home and he goes into his dad's room. Monsters in my closet. Dad's had enough of it. This kid's been reading. And again, they don't get into it too much. There's just enough backstory, not even backstory. There's just enough in the interaction that they're having in this one tiny little scene that you understand that dad is sick and tired of him coming into their room because he's having a nightmare because he reads these horror comics and shit. So he comes in and he goes, "All right, all you monsters, march out, march out. Come on, get out of it. You too, da 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 da," which is typical dad shit. Boy, do I know about that, right? And I know we have to keep the closet.
You on the bed, out of here.
Yeah. He's getting everybody right. He's playing the game because that's what dads do. They kind of play the game, and then the closet gag comes, and it's so fucking funny because he's done all this work, and the kid's like, "There's one in the closet," and he's like, and dad does not look. He swings the door open. The camera, boom, hits him dead on as he swings the door open. He's staring right at Eugene, not looking in the closet, going, "Ooh, scary monster." And meanwhile, fucking the mummy is like reaching out, looking horrific, by the way, a fantastic design, reaching out to go to try and kill everybody, and he's like, "Ah, fucking monster. All right, that's enough. Now you go to bed and I don't want to hear shit about it." And he storms off without ever looking in the closet. Again, the aloof parent, the parent that does not believe in any of this stuff, when in turn it was very much true right in front of his face. The setups for that, the sight gag of that is absolutely genius, and it's peppered throughout this entire movie. There's millions of sight gags in this movie. It's a very, very funny movie.
Another one of my favorite humorous moments, and another great actor who's in this movie, he's in a very brief, literally 2 minutes of the movie, is David Perval, who plays the pilot who's flying the plane.
Yes.
And of course he went on to star in The Sopranos and a lot of other TV shows. Great character actor, been around for many years. But he's in there and he's just like all upset. And he's like, what? He's like, what are you upset about? He's like, should I throw a party? I'm flying a plane with dead bodies. Should I throw a party? He's kind of like, he's like miserable at his job. He's like, do they complain? Do they ask for more little almond things? And he's like, yeah, you're right. This is great. Just that little humor of him just like complaining about his job is funny. Cause you're like, he's like, I can't believe this is my life. I'm flying a plane with dead bodies. And it's just, he's like, I thought they were dead. And he's like, they are. And then he goes back. And of course, that's where we see the great scene with Dracula and he falls and, falls down out of the open pit in the plane. But the humor in this movie all works. It all works and it's all funny. And I love it. Like, just, again, it's the perfect combination of humor and horror and action. And again, I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again, but this is a perfect film because it just hits all those beats. It takes itself seriously when it needs to take itself seriously, like the injection of a very dangerous, villainous Count Dracula. And then it injects those little humor of like, these are 12 and 13-year-old kids. Of course, they're going to be kind of goofy and funny. And, and just like when Eugene, when he's like, is she a version? He has no idea what it means. But he's like, is she a version?
He doesn't even know how to use the word.
Yeah, it's just hilarious things like that. Just little injections of humor. And even in the house, which we all know the famous line of, Wolfman's got Nards, which is the most iconic line from this movie. But even when they're running from Dracula and Dracula's brides and the Wolfman all closing in on him, he's like, haven't you read the Hardy Boys? So you pull a lever and they pull it and they drop down. It's just great. Even the garlic scene when he has the pizza, he unwraps the pizza and he sprays it in Dracula's face. Just all the little beats in this movie were just so perfect, and they inject it at all the right moments. Like, just when you think it's just a little too serious, getting a little bit too harrowing, even in the moment you mentioned, which is my favorite moment in the entire movie, which is Dracula lifting Phoebe in the air, and he's looking at her all sweet and just kind of looking, and he goes, "Give me the amulet, you bitch." And she screams, and he hisses at her, and then Frankenstein grabs him, turns him around, he lowers Phoebe down, he turns around, he goes, "Bogus," and smacks him and sends him flying. Even in that moment, a little bit of humor of him going bogus is just because that's what Phoebe taught him. It's just those little moments of humor that works so well in this movie that it's like serious, it's harrowing, it's action filled, it's perilous. But then there's just those little injections of humor that kind of let you know, like, it's still fun. It's still like a kid's movie. It's just, again, You said it's like a masterclass on how to write a script. It really is. And the crazy thing is, the original script of Shane Black, as I mentioned in the beginning, it was like a 200-page script.
Oh yeah.
And Fred Decker's like, all right, this is like a kid's movie. We got to cut this down. So he cut it down to like 102 pages. But it was originally like a 200-page, like massive behemoth of a script. And I know there were some, I don't know if you had a chance to see, there are some deleted scenes from this movie that are out there. You can see a couple of them. Not really that changed anything about the movie, but like, I've read stories about the script of like how much there was. A lot of this stuff was just like, hey, we need $100 million budget.
Right.
So we're going to bring in planes and all kinds of other effects and shit. And Fred Decker's like, yeah, we got $12 million. So we're going to cut all that out. Which, by the way, I do want to say, and we're going to get to this anyway, so we might as well kind of segue into this. The creature effects in this, which was designed.
We must talk about this.
I want to give credit where credit's due. Now, this is Stan Winston, iconic Stan Winston, who designed so many great creatures. One of our favorite creature creators. But also want to give credit that a lot of these creatures were created by his studio, not directly by Stan Winston. Right. He basically what he did was, he assigned two-man teams to each thing. So, like, here's 2 guys to work on the Wolfman, 2 guys to work on the Gillman, 2 guys to work on Frankenstein. He kind of oversaw everybody. So while, yes, he obviously had a massive influence on this movie, I do want to give credit to his team because he kind of assigned people to build this. But the effects in this movie, for a 1987 movie, even in 1987, $12 million is not a lot of money. I still think the effects in this movie are incredibly well done.
I think all the designs, all the creature designs are amazing. And we need to point this part out. And this is something I only learned recently, is that, yes, this is Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, and they call him the Gillman in this for a very good reason. And the Mummy, they did not have permission from Universal to use these monsters. These are Universal trademarked monsters. They can't trademark the name Dracula because they don't own that, but they can trademark the look. So there's these little touches that they actually had to do to tweak them just enough. And I think even today, they wouldn't even be able to get away with how little they tweaked them. Frankenstein, they moved the bolts from the neck to the temples. They changed kind of the shape of the Wolfman's face to be a little more what they call lupine, right? The Mummy, I think they exposed more of him to be more zombie-ish.
And they slimmed him down. They made it
they made him really skinny. Yeah, really like just bones, because they knew that, and they were trying to actually be a little more accurate, because real mummies are actually super, super small because they're basically shrink wrap bones. And probably the best design of all of them that gets probably the least amount of love is Gillman, which is the creature from the Black Lagoon, just kind of repurposed. Stan Winston and his team designed an all-new look for the creature from the Black Lagoon. They had to call him Gillman. They can't call him the creature from the Black Lagoon. They didn't own the rights. The design of that monster is incredible, and I haven't seen something that good since Shape of Water, which was designed by the same fucking guys. That's incredible to me. Those same guys designed the Shape of Water creature, which, by the way, you think Guillermo del Toro doesn't know the Monster Squad backwards and forwards? Of course he does. And you think he didn't go, man, I wonder who made that Gillman monster, because it's the best looking fucking monster. He probably called them, reached out and went, oh, cool. You want to design my creature from the Black Lagoon? And that's the next best one I've ever seen.
And also the guy that there was, like I said, there were 2-man teams on every creature. They had 2-man team on the Wolfman, 2-man team on the Gillman, 2-man team on the Frankenstein's monster. Tom Woodruff Jr. was one of the guys working on the Gillman. And when they created the Gillman, they're like, this is going to be a pretty harrowing experience for whoever's in this suit, because you basically had to get in. It's a rubber suit, and you had to get in it, and they had to glue you into it to hide the seams. It's not like a zipper. They literally glued you in, and then they glued the helmet on. So once you put this Gillman outfit on, you're in there for the day. 12, 14-hour days. You are the Gillman, and there's no way to drink. There's no way to pee. You're in this suit. They glue you in, and to take you out is a whole other experience. So they have to leave you in there literally the whole day. So Tom Woodruff Jr., who is the creature creator, he's the one designing this whole thing. He's just like, I can't ask anyone to do this. This is going to be a miserable experience being in this heavy rubber suit all day, and the claustrophobia alone would make me run
Yeah.
screaming down the road. So Tom Woodruff Jr., the guy who designed the Gillman outfit with his partner, he goes in the suit. So what you're seeing the Gillman in Monster Squad is Tom Woodruff Jr. He is the creature creator, and he's in the suit. He's just like, I can't. No one's going to want to do this, so I'll do it. And he gets in the Gillman outfit, and he wears the Gillman suit throughout the entire movie. And they actually said in that documentary, Wolfman's Got Nards, he said the first scene they had the Gillman was when he's under the water, and they're like, oh, Jesus, I hope this holds up. And it did, of course, when he comes up, because he lifts up, Frankenstein's casket and tosses it when Dracula awakens him with the lightning strike. But they got in the water like, oh, Jesus, is this going to hold up? Is it going to work? And then it did. But he's just like, I can't put anyone else in here, so he's just like, I'll just get in this suit, which is wild.
By the way, Tom Woodruff, he's a player in something else we were talking about this year. We've been talking about the Alien franchise. I believe Tom Woodruff and his team stepped in. It's either at Alien 3, I believe it was Alien 3. Maybe they may have even worked on Aliens, I'm not sure. But they did Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection. So this guy's the guy who built those aliens as well, and they're actually really well designed aliens. I mean, listen, those aren't the best movies around, but the creature design's fantastic. This guy was in that damn suit. That suit is seamless. I remember as a kid looking at Gillman going, I don't see how this is a costume. I could kind of see how the Wolfman was a costume. You understood that, they built up effects around Tom Noonan's face to make him Frankenstein. You could understand it. The Mummy was honestly, like, it's still one of the best zombies you will ever see, because they got the skinniest possible man they could find, and they wrapped him up in this thing and gummed him up, and he truly looked like a ghoul. Really one of the best zombie designs you'll ever see. These creature designs are special. They're not just special because they had to tweak them so that Universal wouldn't sue them into obscurity. They're just beautifully made. And you're right, it is important to note that while Stan Winston oversaw it, these teams created it. These guys that are at the Stan Winston school, that are at his own production company, they designed this thing, and Stan Winston gets to go, yep, that's me and my team. You know what I mean? Like, but it is some of the best you'll ever see of these monsters.
Yeah, and I think, listen, to have to take these iconic looks. When you think about Bela Lugosi as Dracula, you think about Lon Chaney, you think about, the Universal monsters, you think about the Creature from the Black Lagoon, all these different, these classic monsters. So then you have to take them and you have to make them look similar enough to people who know what they are, but also different enough to where Universal doesn't sue your ass off. And so to do that with these characters, it's so great. Like, because when I think like the Wolfman in this film, I've always been a big fan of the Wolfman on two legs.
Yes,
I'm not
same.
saying there's not good versions of the basically Wolfman that basically becomes a monster, like an actual wolf. There's versions of that. I know they did that in like True Blood and some other things like that. But I've always preferred the monster on two legs, where it's a wolf man.
Yeah.
Now, while I do think the definitive werewolf is Dog Soldiers, where they turn into these like humongous horking creatures, they're still on two legs. This Wolfman design is incredible. He's scary, and I love, again, they keep the little touches, which is he's got the torn pants and the torn shirt, and they make a great joke about that. He's like he had to wear pants so you wouldn't see his wolf dork. Like they make jokes about that, like why he wore pants. It's hilarious. And then sure enough, we see why he wears pants, because he transforms from being a man. He's just wearing the shredded clothes of when he was still a man, and that's what he's left with when he becomes the Wolfman. But even that Wolfman design, while it is similar to other Wolfman designs, it's great, and it's actually pretty terrifying when he roars at you and that claw and like he's a pretty ferocious animal. And then again, you talk about the Gillman, talk about Frankenstein, the Mummy, they were all great. But I do want to mention the character with the least amount of design was Dracula, who is just wearing the classic, suit, the Seinfeld shirt under the black suit and the cape, hair slicked back, pale
it's
complexion.
Very classic Bela Lugosi look. Very classic.
Red contacts for the red eyes, things like that. So that then falls on Duncan Regehr to give us the mannerisms and the facial expressions and just that performance. It all meshes together so perfectly well, because without that performance to hold it all together, the glue, because I'm not saying it's easy to play the Gill Man. Trust me, I just said a minute ago, you'd have to pay me a ridiculously large amount of money for me to be I'm not even claustrophobic, but I feel like being in a suit like that, closed in on that for like 12 hours, I would probably have a panic attack at some point. Even the Wolfman suit, like, even though it wasn't as intricate as the Gill Man, like, even that, you're covered in fur and you're in this suit. You got a big mask on your face.
Big
and they
animatronic mask, yeah.
Yeah, and they said with the Gill Man, like, you had two little slits. Like, you couldn't really see anything, you know what I mean? Like, they had to hide it because you couldn't, they had to hide it for the production. All those kind of things combined, like, those are not easy. Even, Tom Noonan, who had a little bit more to work with because he was more just makeup over his face. You could still see his face, but he obviously had these huge shoes on. He had to kind of lumber. But to fall on Dracula's shoulders where he was just the only man, and he had to sell this and do it in such a way that it all kind of came together. Again, I know I made my controversial statement earlier saying the Goonies, that, I love the Goonies, I do, but I think the Monster Squad's a better movie. All the Bela Lugosi fans, all the Lon Chaney fans, all the Universal fans come for my throat, that's fine. I think these versions of the Universal monsters are far better than the original Universal monsters. Not only because they're slightly different, but also because the differences actually make them better and scarier in my mind. Like you said, the Mummy, this thing's creeping, crawling, his eyes, he looks so terrifying. He looks like what a mummy would actually look like. Dracula, again, I don't have to keep going on about that. Even Frankenstein's monster, like, Tom Noonan is a pretty imposing figure. We reviewed Manhunter on this show and how great he was in that role. But everything about these, and the Wolfman is terrifying. The Gill Man is terrifying. These, to me, are the definitive versions of those characters, even though they technically weren't supposed to use those characters.
You're 100% right. They never looked better. These classic Universal-style monsters never looked better than when they were not exactly the Universal monsters. I mean, it really is the peak version of these. The only times I've seen it better was in The Shape of Water, which was from the same designer, right? They just had more money. They had an actual budget and a lot more time and money to actually make a fantastic Gill Man. That's the next time it was even close to comparable. And Guillermo del Toro, guess what? He's going to be doing a Frankenstein movie here pretty soon, with Jacob Elordi playing Frankenstein's monster. I'm very curious to see how that goes because, again, Guillermo del Toro, I guarantee you, heavily, heavily influenced by this movie because the designs are perfect. These are incredibly perfect monsters.
Yeah, this movie is just, like I said, there's just so many elements to make this movie work. And, again, it all goes back to the script and the story and the direction. But again, and also, we've talked a lot about the monsters and the design of the monsters, but also we gotta give credit where credit's due in terms of like the casting and the performances from the kids, because we've said on this show how many times when we reviewed films with younger actors, and you and I always kind of feel a little bit bad when we review something. We're like, man, that kid actor kind of. I actually just had this conversation with a friend of mine. There's this new show on Disney Plus, Star Wars Acolyte. I don't know if you. I'm assuming you haven't seen.
I know what it's about, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah. This is not spoiled. There's a flashback in one of the episodes where the lead characters, there's younger versions of them in the story. And I said to my friend who's like a huge Star Wars fanatic, "Is like, did you watch this? Did you watch the Acolyte?" And like, "Oh yeah, I really like it." And I was like, "Did you see the younger actors?" Like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh boy." That was rough. Like they were pretty, like, it was very much like the joke they made forever about Hayden Christensen's performance in the in I think it was Attack of the Clones, where he's like, "They killed them, Padme. They killed them all. They killed their parents." It was like very mechanical reading, and like, I'm sorry, but the kids just were like, "Why did you do that?" "I don't know why I did that." And I'm like, oh my god, it takes you out. It does, like it or not, and you feel bad because they're kids. Like, they're not supposed to be Robert De Niro and freaking, why am I not thinking of his name? The guy from There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis. They're not supposed to be that. They're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. But the casting of this movie, Ashley Bank as Phoebe, which that one blows me away. A
It's
5-year-old
probably,
girl to be
yeah,
that.
it's one of the best performances in the movie.
Andre Gower, Rudy Lambert, like all, or what was
Ryan
Lambert, Ryan Lambert, Robbie Kiger, Brent Challam, which I know we're gonna have to talk about at some point.
We'll talk about it. I have him in there. We'll talk about him.
Yeah. But these kids absolutely like ruled. They were. This was. You know what? One thing I did not look up, and I wish I had, and I should have dug a little deeper on the IMDb page for this movie. And I feel bad kind of that I didn't do this. Although I do know Fred Decker was intimately involved in the casting of this movie. He had a hand in all the casting because he talked about that in the documentary. But whoever was the casting director for this movie, Academy Award for you, whatever that's worth, 30 some odd years later from us, that means probably nothing really. But that whoever cast this movie deserves a freaking pat on the back and like a serious, because Patrick, there's not a bad performance and there's not a bad casted part in this movie from the kids, which again, to me, that's the hardest part because they're kids.
It's really hard. Yeah.
And then the creatures. And even the adults, like Stephen Mocht is a great character actor. He's been around forever. I've seen him in a lot of things. We mentioned Jonathan Grise, who, of course, went on, and he's, again, he may have had arguably the biggest career out of anybody. Mary Ellen Trainor, who sadly is gone, but she was the great, mom character. You mentioned she's also the mom in Goonies. Leonardo Simino, who plays Scary German guy. Stan Shaw, who plays the detective the partner to Stephen Mocht's character. He's been in a lot of stuff, and he's a great character actor. Very great comedy timing in this movie. He's hilarious.
Very funny in this movie.
Every piece of this movie, casting wise, is perfect, and that's so hard to do.
It's so hard to do. And with regards to the kids, the formula is simple, and I won't belabor it. Write kids like they're kids. Don't write kids and try to make them not kids. Don't try to over sophisticate them. Let them talk how they would talk. If a kid wants to change the line because they're like, why would I say that? Oh, what would you say? I'd say it like this. Great, do that. Let them be kids. Let the kids be kids, and you will get these kind of performances out of these kids because they feel genuine to the time. To someone that's younger than us, they're going to feel dated. They're going to be like, what? And I'm like, no, trust me. That's how kids talked in the 1980s. Like, it feels like kids from the 1980s that I went to school with. It does not feel like, and there are movies from this era. We've talked about it. We've talked about them where it's like, ooh, that didn't work out well because the casting directors got the wrong kids, the kids that were trying to like be adults in the read or whatever. And the directors weren't letting the kids be kids. They were trying to morph them into adults a little bit. They let these kids be kids and it shows and it feels fun. And my kids can relate to these kids that are literally 40 years older than them. They just go, yeah, I see. I get it. Like, I understand what they're speaking my language, Dad. Like they can feel it. And that is an absolute gem. And it's a great little like time capsule of how to do it.
So before we get to categories, I want to throw out one little nugget about this movie that I know you don't know about because this is a personal fact about me. But so again, we saw this movie relatively, I assume, probably right around the same time, 7, 8 years old. Still probably, right around that age where we still shouldn't be watching horror films, but we were watching horror films. Funny fact about the Monster Squad. Again, remember, this is in the 80s, late 80s, very early 90s when we saw this movie. That was long before the internet existed. Do you know, I know you don't know this, but I'm saying this for a fact just to watch your face. Do you know that this is the movie where I learned who Stephen King was?
No shit.
Because this is Sean, the lead character, wears the Stephen King Rules shirt. And I didn't know at 7, 8 years old who Stephen King was. And I was like, Stephen King Rules? What's that? And I looked it up and I found out he's like the horror master. And I found out all the books he had written and everything. And when I was a kid, I made my parents buy me a Stephen King Rules shirt. So I had that shirt. Can't remember where they got it from. Don't know where they had it from. I had it as a kid, but I made them get me the Stephen King Rules shirt. But I had never heard of Stephen King at that point in my life. I was 7 years old, 8 years old. I had no idea. And so when I saw it, I was like, who's Stephen King? Stephen King rules. Sean likes him. I must like him. And that's how I discovered Stephen King, was from watching the Monster Squad. Because at that point, I hadn't seen Salem's Lot or anything. I hadn't read it. You know what I mean? Like I was 8 years old. So yeah, that's how I discovered who Stephen King was.
That's wild. I had no idea that's where you learned about Stephen King. That's funny because I don't know when Real Genius came out, but I'm guessing it was literally like within a year of this movie. Val Kilmer wears a shirt in there with like a gorilla on it. I went and found that shirt and bought that exact shirt. That's funny that we both have shirts from like movies from that exact era.
Yeah, but that's how I discovered Stephen King. So I was like, who's Stephen King? And he rules. Well, Sean likes him. I must like him because, and also we're going to get to this. We're going to get to some really fun categories in a second. I'm just throwing this out to you. When you were a kid and you watched the Monster Squad, who did you want to be? Who in the Monster Squad were not your favorite performance? Not
right.
Who did you relate most to?
Categories aside, I'm glad you asked. The one I wanted to be 100% was Rudy. 100%. I wanted to wear a fucking leather jacket and shades and have black spiky hair and be the coolest fucking kid around. Like, that's what I wanted. And now that you watch the movie, you realize, like, Rudy wasn't that cool. He was just older and tougher. And he stood up to some bullies. So he was actually a good guy the whole time. But I really, something about me totally related to him because I was like, he's not really a bad guy. He's just a bad boy. And I was like, that's cool. I want to wear a fucking leather jacket. Meanwhile, that's really like, he almost was dressed like the Fonz. Like he was dressed like a 1950s greaser, which if you look at most movies from the 80s, they actually have tons and tons of influence from the 1950s. Rudy was like a quintessential 1950s bad boy. So for me, it was 100% Rudy. What about you?
So to this day, by the way, I still laugh. There's one part about the Monster Squad that stands that always still makes me laugh, kind of like in the costuming, is the fact that Rudy's wearing penny loafers. Did you ever notice that? Like, he's not wearing boots, he's wearing penny loafers. I was like, why is Rudy in penny loafers of all things? But anyways, that always made me laugh. So like, who picked the shoes? For me, so now Damon of 2024 would be Rudy, because that's leather jacket, kind of the bad boy character. Even though I'm a nice guy, but like tattoos. I would be Rudy. But when I was a kid, I was Sean, 100% Sean. I wanted to be Sean because he's the one that kind of figures things out, and that was me as a kid. I was the one who kind of did I was the detective work, and I continue that into my life now. I'm a researcher and a journalist. It's what I do. I kind of dig for facts. I was Sean when he has that moment when he sees the Van Helsing's diary, and his mom leaves him that note, and he says, "Mr. Alucard called, possible money." Did you know it says Van Halen diary, not Van Helsing diary? It says Van Halen diary.
Yeah.
And he starts figuring it out. He starts typing out. You think he thinks it's Lucifer at first. He scratches out. It's not right. And he goes, DRACULA. Oh shit! It's Dracula.
Yeah.
And then he gets everyone together. We're the Monster Squad. That was me as a kid. I was the one who kind of figured things out and wanted to like group my friends together to be the Monster Squad. So Sean was the one I most related to in the movie. Not because he was the lead, more just because I was that kind of curious kid that figured things out. So yeah, in later life, 100% Rudy. Back then though, I wanted to be Sean.
Yeah, yeah, and I was probably closer to Sean as a kid. Like I was, it's a fantastic piece of casting for Andre Gower. Like it really was. Like I think he embodied what probably most kids were like.
And I also loved, again, you said they wrote them as kids, but they also wrote them as kids. And what I mean by that is when you're 12, 13 years old, you're on that cusp of puberty. Like when they're in the clubhouse and he goes, "Oh, a fat kid farted," and they're all arguing. He's like, "God damn it, will you shut up?" They curse, which kids in movies in the 80s, they still were like, very like, oh gosh and gee and swell and like if they said ass, you're like, ooh, they said ass. These kids are like, God damn it, like they curse.
Kids you remember curse.
Like,
kids curse too.
Absolutely, and you were like when you learned curse words and you learned a new one, boy, did you use the shit out of it.
I won the bad word contest in kindergarten. Everyone tried out, and they came to me and I went fuck, and they were like, "What?" And I was like, What? And by the way, my 7-year-old just yesterday was like, can I use the F word real quick? It's relevant to what I have to say. Like kids curse. And so the fact that the kids in this movie curse is actually reflective of what kids are doing. Kids are saying bad words all the fucking time. They pick it up, they learn it very quickly, and they either learn their bad words or they don't learn their bad words. But these kids are use bad words because guess what? Most kids do.
There's a great video out there, and I can't remember who it is. It's an entrepreneur, but they were talking about like he's a billionaire, and he's doing like a seminar with people, and they're like, "Why do you curse so much?" And he talks about it. He's like, "It's just words. Like
Yeah.
I use colorful language. It doesn't mean that I'm like a bad person or like I live it like I almost feel like and not to get like way off subject here, but like we get too lost in language and stuff like that. Now, certainly, I don't want kids using bad language, and what I mean by bad language, like racial,
Yeah,
things like that.
abusive language.
Yeah, I don't want that or like homophobic slurs, none of that. But who cares? Like, I'm not saying you should be in your classroom and tell your teacher to fuck off. I'm not saying that.
No, yeah, of
But
course
like,
not.
who really cares that you're saying damn it or shit or I mean, I'm not saying that again. You don't need to. You still need to show respect and that but that has nothing to do with language. And I think we get so lost in like, you can't say the bad word. Who gives a shit? Like it's we're all
Certainly we don't.
yeah. But I think it's funny that like we get so lost in that, and I love that they don't dumb it down in this movie. This is the way kids talk. When I was 12, 13 years old, when my parents were running around, I was a fuck machine, man. I fucked everyone. I was like, fuck, 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 fuck. Like, I was all over it, you know what I mean? And anytime you could say a bad word, you would say it. And that's just kind of the point. And kids spoke like kids of that age, which is, again, remarkable because this is a guy, and, again, Shane Black, look him up. He's a very prolific screenwriter and director. Been around forever, Predator, Iron Man 3. He's been around, done a lot of things even more recently, too. Lethal Weapon, I mentioned in the intro, wrote Lethal Weapon, which is wild. Right before he wrote, right as he wrote Monster Squad, then he wrote Lethal Weapon, sold Lethal Weapon, and then made Monster Squad. Just talk about a 1-2 punch right there. But to have that kind of knowledge at like 23, 24 when he wrote this movie and wrote it brilliantly for 13-year-old kids, pretty remarkable because we've talked about this when we've worked on scripts together. I've said like I get a little scared sometimes writing for certain characters because I can't get in the head of like a 22-year-old girl. I have to really like study it and like understand, watch interviews and things like that to really understand the machinations of how characters of a certain age or a certain gender would speak. It's remarkable in 1986 or 85, I think is when he wrote this script, that he got it so right on because there's no internet. There is no internet. He's not going online to research. He's not, he's just got to go for what he understands. And to get it so perfectly is pretty remarkable.
It really is. And, Shane Black might argue and say, no, this is not my best script. But man, the way it falls into place, it's obviously the combined effort of him and Fred Dekker. Anyway, Fred Dekker helped write the script too. It's one of the great scripts. It's not a good script. It's a great script. And I'll say it one more time. If you're thinking about writing, and not even horror, if you're just thinking about writing, like, oh, I want to write the next Jurassic Park. Well, study Jurassic Park, but also study this. It's a fantastic script.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into some categories because we got a lot to get to with categories because this is, as you can clearly tell, a movie that you and I absolutely adore. And let's kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show, and that is with Best Performance. Patrick, we already said it, not to belabor the point. This is a cast and a movie filled with great performances. There are no bad performances. There really aren't. Like, I'm being serious. Like, there's not a single bad performance in the movie. But who is your best performance in Monster Squad? And I imagine it's probably hard to narrow it down, honestly.
It was. It really was. And this time around, I really had to give it to Tom Noonan, who plays Frankenstein's monster. Tom Noonan, fantastic genre actor, has been in tons of stuff. And I've actually loved everything I've ever seen Tom Noonan in, despite House of the Devil. He's like my favorite part of House of the Devil. Other than that, I love Tom Noonan. The emotion that he could convey as Frankenstein's monster has never been done since. I'm curious to see Guillermo del Toro's version, But Robert De Niro has played Frankenstein. I mean, a lot of great actors have played Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster. Tom Noonan breaks your heart as Frankenstein's monster. He does. Every little piece of what he does, the way he chooses to walk, the way he chooses to hold Phoebe's hand, any of the little words that he puts out, his little bogus, like when he says bogus, the comedic effect on those. Is it his greatest performance? I don't know. Maybe, could that be taking it a bridge too far? I don't know. But I do know that emotionally speaking, it's a very touching performance, and it gets me every time. And if I swear, if you don't choke up when him and Phoebe are having their final moments as he's being ripped away into limbo, and if you don't tear up during that, you may be dead inside. I don't know what to do for you if you can't feel in that moment. It's a beautiful moment shared between two great performers, by the way. Ashley Bank did an amazing job as little tiny Phoebe, playing alongside this hulking monster who broke our hearts as Frankenstein's monster.
Frankenstein's monster, in theory, is supposed to be exactly what we say it is. It's a monster. He's terrifying. But he has the two most heartfelt moments in this entire movie. One, when they show him the mask and he knocks it down, he touches himself and he goes, "Scary." And they all kind of look at him like, "Oh man, like that's just sad." Like he thinks he's terrifying. And that one's like hits me right in the feels.
Yeah.
And then that end scene, and by the way, I know we keep talking about this documentary. I would highly recommend go to watch it if you haven't seen it. But Wolfman's got Nards. They show some of the behind the scenes, and they actually show Fred Decker coaching Ashley Bank to get ready for that scene. He's like, no. He's teaching. He's basically showing her how emotional she needs to get in that scene when she's letting Frankenstein go. I've seen this movie, as I said, 108 times. I have no idea the actual count, but it's probably around that. I watched it again a couple nights ago to get ready for the podcast. I didn't need to watch it, but I did because, I just wanted to see it again. I've seen that scene 108 times. And on the 108th time, just like the first time, I welled up. I was like, does he really have to go away? Does he have to go into limbo? Can't we save Frankenstein's monster? It without fail. In my age now, I'm like, oh God, just don't let him go. Don't let him go, Phoebe. It's brilliant. It is, and listen. I like Tom Noonan a lot. I think Manhunter's incredible. I love him in Heat. I love everything he's done. But I would say I think you're right. I think this is his best performance. This is his most complete performance because a lot of times with Tom Noonan, it feels like they want him to play a very one note kind of character, and he brings more to the role than that. I think Manhunter's probably the one most people will say that's his best, which he's really good.
It's pretty good. Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah. But I think Monster Squad's the best because he has to take a character that doesn't speak a lot, no real diet, there's no monologues coming from Frankenstein's monster in this movie, but the way he displays emotion in this movie just breaks your fucking heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so good.
It's dynamite performance.
Can you want to take 3 guesses as to who my best performance is, and I'll tell you the first 2 are probably wrong. It's the guy we're going to have an interview with here in a little bit, and that's Duncan Regehr as Dracula.
That was my first guess, by the way. just so we're clear.
I know that was your. I know you know that. And this again, and I say this to him in the interview, not to spoil the interview, but I tell you, like I say, he's my favorite Dracula, but I'm not saying that just because I'm interviewing him. I've said this on past episodes of the show.
When I had no idea past episodes. I go, we weren't even planning on it, and I was like, he's the best Dracula of all time. He is.
So to use the phrase I use again, is deliciously evil. Every line he delivers in this movie has such charisma and swagger behind it, but also it's so fucking evil. He said he plays him like a sociopath, and holy shit does he ever. Everything he utters in this movie is terrifying and heady and feels like it has weight behind it, and it feels like legitimately scary. When he says, "I will have your son." Everything he delivers, and then that great scene at the end, in that final scene when he's just marching forward and the cops are coming after him. He just does not give a single solitary fuck. And he's just continues marching forward. They come, he grabs the one, he takes the one guy, knocks him down. The guy comes to the club, knocks him down, grabs the one guy in his head, snaps his neck, just keeps marching towards the kids. That might be one of the scariest scenes of like a Dracula of all time, because there's no like, we almost got him. No, the fuck you don't. Because this guy is just, he is pure evil. Everything he does is just deliciously evil. I don't know a better way to describe it. It's just, it's dripping with charisma, but also dripping with evil.
Absolutely. And I'll just say this. Watch, if you haven't seen Wolfman Got Nards, watch that and watch him talk about the process that he put into that character. You'll think you're talking to Daniel Day-Lewis. He is dead serious about how he chose all of the different nuances that his Dracula has, all of that stuff. He was very, very, very artistically, he approached it in a very artistic way, like a serious, real and trained actor. Like, I would be very curious to see what a Daniel Day-Lewis Dracula would look like, because I know he would take it that level of serious the way that Duncan Regehr did. Duncan Regehr didn't just, he goes, I'm doing a low budget kids movie. It's a horror movie. I'm playing Dracula. Okay. He could have phoned it in. He did his homework, and it shows. And it is easily, in my opinion, the best depiction of Dracula on screen ever. And it's in a fun kids adventure movie, but it's absolutely perfect.
And the great thing about it, and I think this is the hardest thing to do, and why I also think this performance is so great, is because there are a million versions of this out there. It's hard not to allow something to seep in a little bit, right? Like Bela Lugosi's Dracula is the most iconic look. Now, I would imagine, being honest here in 2024, I'd say there's a lot of people who have never seen Bela Lugosi's Dracula. You know the picture, you know the image, but I'd say there's a lot of people who haven't even seen that movie.
Yeah.
And I'd say there's probably still a lot of people who haven't seen Christopher Lee's Dracula in the Hammer films. Now, I have and you have, but we're horror fanatics. But again, and by the way, I'm not faulting anyone for that. These are movies from like the 30s and 40s and the 60s and 70s. Like, I understand not everyone's going to go back and watch it. Trust me, some of those old movies do feel so incredibly dated. And it is hard to get through some of those old monster movies. I'll be the first to admit it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh my, they're all classics. They're all untouchable. That's bullshit. They are. Some of them are hard to watch, or they don't look good, or they're not well acted. Bela Lugosi's the most famous. Christopher Lee is probably second. And then there's a billion versions of Dracula out there. By the time you get to 1987, there's a billion versions of Dracula between TV and movies and all these different things. What Duncan Regehr did with his Dracula is it looked similar to the Draculas you know and love. It looked a little similar to more closer to the Bela Lugosi Dracula and somewhat to the Christopher Lee Dracula. But his performance was so wildly different than either of theirs. Yet it's the same character. And that, to me, is like, it's almost like, I know this is a really weird comparison, but there's like 20 Jokers in the Batman universe now.
Oh, yeah.
Between animation and live action. Now, everyone has their own opinion about what is the best Joker, and I feel like sometimes you can go too far trying to make it your own, and then you end up with Jared Leto in Suicide Squad, and it's like he tried to go so far off to the right. I really like Jared Leto as an actor outside of his House of Gucci performance, which was just terrible. I like Jared Leto a lot as an actor. But it felt like he had to go so far out to the right, and David Ayer was like, we got to put tattoos on him. We're going to make him look like a gangster in gold teeth. They went so far trying to make it unique and different from Heath Ledger's Joker, so it was so far removed from that no one could compare it, that it didn't even feel like the Joker really in that moment. And then there's going to be some people who tell you Jack Nicholson's Joker is the best. But I think the definitive Joker in live action that we all know is Heath Ledger. That was such an iconic performance, and he made it his own. He took little things from the Joker in the comics, the Joker in animation, which is Mark Hamill, which is, again, maybe the best Joker ever. Took all these little elements, but then he made it his own. So this is not a Joker you've seen before. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's ultimately Heath Ledger's Joker. And there's a reason why posthumously he won a freaking Oscar for that performance, because he made a character that you knew You've seen it dozens of times, but he made it his own. He did it in such a way that it was so incredible. That to me is what Duncan Regehr. There's a million Draculas out there, and I'm certainly not bashing any of those performances. But what he did was he took a character we all know, we all are familiar with, we've seen it 1,000 times, and he made it his own.
Yeah. Well said.
Let's move on to our next category, and I love this category. Most valuable squad member. Now, this is a little controversial. We're going to have a bit of an argument here.
Sure.
We have differing opinions on who is the most valuable squad member. Now, can I tell you real quick who is the least valuable squad member? I think you probably have.
Let's say it. 3, 2, 1. Patrick.
Patrick. He does
Patrick
nothing.
is absolutely useless. His only job was to get a virgin, and he even screwed that up. And I guess he made some business cards, so I guess that worked out in the end. Useless.
I watched this movie again, and I was paying very specific attention. I knew that before, but I watched it. I was like, God, he really does nothing in this movie.
He really is useless in this movie.
He's a good sidekick. He does make some funny, humorous observations, but yeah, he's very much like he is 100% in there for a joke because he is not. He does nothing in the.
Eugene might be second most useless, but his job was to scream a lot, and he did a ton of screaming. I mean, he did right for the army. He did right to have them come out. They just came out late, but he did right to them.
Not his fault, not his fault.
Not his fault. They can't knock him for trying. But Patrick, Jesus, he did jack shit in this movie. I was like, wow, you are the least valuable Monster Squad member.
Yeah, Patrick did dick in this movie. Sorry, I just had to throw that out there. So, Patrick, give me your debate here, your argument for the most valuable squad member.
So I'm gonna say the name of my squad member, and then I want you to say yours, and then we are going to make our arguments, because I'm curious why you're so fired up about this, because my most valuable squad member, it became very clear to me in this latest viewing, was indeed Horace. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see this before. What about you, Damon? Who is your most valuable squad member?
My most valuable squad member, without a doubt, is Rudy. Without a doubt, it is Rudy. That's my guy.
Now tell me why Rudy is your most valuable squad member.
Okay, so let's go back to the montage.
Very important.
You and I love
that montage.
No one in the entire Monster Squad does anything to actually get ready to battle the monsters except for Rudy. He makes the stakes. He makes the silver bullets. He goes and gets the archery set. Yeah, they have that one scene where Horace and Patrick are looking at a map of Shadowbrook Road. That's not fucking rocket science.
And Sean is the one that's really doing the planning. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So and then Phoebe's playing dress up with Frankenstein. So like I don't expect her to be like out there whittling down wooden stakes. Rudy's the only one who does anything. He's actually the only one in that entire montage who does anything to get ready for the battle. He's in shop class making the stakes. He's in shop class, which, by the way, who's shop class where you can make silver bullets? That's an interesting one. I'd like to have a discussion with that school. He's making the silver bullets, and he's still in the archery set. He's the only one who's getting the weapons necessary to actually battle the monsters.
And when it comes time, I'm agreeing with you on this part. When it comes time, he kicks much ass. He actually kills one of the Frankenstein's brides, or two of them.
Two of them. He shoots one with the arrow, and then he kills the other with a stake, and then
he stakes with the other one, and he kills Wolfman.
He kills the Wolfman. He's the one. He's like, told you, silver bullet's the only way to kill a werewolf.
Great setup, because what did he do? He got stakes, he got a bow and arrow, and he got the silver bullet, and later on they all paid off. Right? Classic Chekhov's gun. If you're going to show it, use it. Rudy does exactly that. He finds those weapons. He uses them to help the Monster Squad in the end. Why I believe Horace is the most valuable member. Horace, I would argue, was the most afraid. He was incredibly afraid. When they went to Shadowbrook Road, he was like, dude, and we'll have that in the best lines. He's like, let's get the fuck out of here. I don't want to do this. I'm scared. When we meet Horace, he's being bullied by two kids. In fact, Rudy, your most valuable member, has to come and save him. Horace is terrified the whole time in this movie. He's scared to death in this movie. But what Horace does is he delivers what is the most iconic moment in this movie, he kicks Wolfman in the nards as they are being closed in on. This is the kid who does not want to be in there. This is the kid who should be pissing his pants because he's being descended upon by monsters. But when it comes time, Sean just tells him to kick Wolfman in the nards. Sean doesn't kick. Sean could have kicked him in the nards. Horace did it. Then let's fast forward a little bit later. Dracula, down when they're down in the pits in the catacombs, they find the amulet. Dracula is fucking on them. He's about to kill Sean. Once again, Sean is in trouble. Horace comes to rescue because, like him, like any good kid, he's got a piece of pizza on him. In his tinfoil, he unwraps the pizza. Terrified, he's facing fucking Dracula, who is not fucking around. And he burns Dracula with his garlic in his pizza, gets them away. He saves the moment. They would have never had the amulet. They'd have been dead right there in that catacomb if Horace hadn't have broken out that garlic pizza. But it's not over. In the end, the gill man swamp creature, he's coming for everybody. He's knocking the shit out of police officers and stuff, and he's coming straight at Horace, who is still, by the way, very scared. And he's banging on the door. He's begging it. And who's inside that little shop? It's those fucking bullies, man. And he's like, EJ, let me in. And the bully's like, I'm really scared now. I'm not letting you in. And EJ was gonna let Gillman kill Horace. Horace fucking, with all the fear in his body, still musters the strength to shoot Gillman dead with a shotgun. And then when EJ comes out and he wants to, kind of like backhandedly compliment Horace by saying, hey, fat kid, good job. He goes, my name is Horace. In that moment, he stands up for himself. Finally, you're not going to call me fat kid no more. I stood down Dracula. I stood down the Wolfman. I stood down Gillman. What did you do? And he cocks that gun and they play the Rambo music and all that shit. He earns his place. And because he was the most afraid of all of them. And that's why he gets my most valuable squad member.
Now, I'm not disagreeing that Horace was awesome. He was. He kicks Wolfman in the nards. He has the garlic pizza, which is a great twist in that moment. And EJ, the little shit, when he's like, EJ, open the door. And he's scared out of his mind, and he shoots the gill man, and he's like, hey, fat kid, nice job. And he goes, my name, racks that shotgun, is Horace. You're like, yeah, fuck yeah, Horace. Yeah. My one little, just the littlest thing. Be honest, be honest, Patrick. A shotgun to kill Gillman. Gillman's kind of a pussy. I mean, come on. I mean, it's kind of. But
it's Gillman. What are you gonna do, right?
I know,
but we don't have like a lore for how to kill Gillman.
I know, but I'm just saying, I'm like all the other cops, like they just run up and try to hit him. Like no one thought to have a gun on them. Like, and then we
have established cops are stupid in 80s horror.
Yeah, that's
movies,
true.
So
that's
nothing
true.
about that saying, is out of the ordinary.
You have to admit, of all the like cool character deaths, of like obviously we know how we know Dracula is a vampire. All these things.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But see, my point is, yes, of course he gets killed very easily, but he's just a giant fish. That's ultimately all he is.
Yeah.
But Horace was shitting himself. He was stuck in a corner. He didn't want to fight the gill man. He wanted to get in but he faced his fear, and that's why I give him most valuable squad.
And you're not wrong. He's awesome. He does face his fear. The reason why I lean towards Rudy are for those two factors. One, he's the only one who really did anything to get ready for this whole thing. Like he's the one.
He certainly like got the gear.
And then he faces the more dangerous threats because he faces down the brides of Dracula, who are vampires. You know what I mean? They're coming for him. They're coming to kill him, and they are not going to be killed by anything but stakes to the heart. And then he actually faces down the Wolfman, which the Wolfman, you could argue, next to Dracula, is the most terrifying creature in this entire movie because he tears through cops. You blow him into bits, and he recombines, and he kills the coroner. He's like the most vicious guy. And he's just ripping these cops apart, and they can't do anything to him. And he has to hurriedly dump out the bullets from the other gun, put in the one silver bullet, and when the monster turns to face him, he shoots him and kills the Wolfman. And also, let's not forget, Rudy is reluctantly joining this group. Like, he's just helping his friend Horace, who's being bullied. And he stops. He says, "You dropped your candy bar, EJ." He's like,
Yeah.
"It's his. It's yours now." He's like,
Yeah.
"Eat up, and we'll call it a day." I love that scene. It's just like fucking.
No, it's great. I love Rudy. And by the way, these are the two most valuable squad members. 100%. And by the way,
we're arguing semantics. We're really arguing semantics.
It's semantics. Rudy also killed the mummy. The mummy was attacking them in Scary German Guy's Jeep, and he gets the bow and arrow, and we'll get to that in a moment too. These are the two best.
Yeah.
But it's like Rudy in a very practical way. You're like, yeah, he did a lot of the work, like the lion's share. But I choose Horace because Horace didn't want to do any of this. He was clearly he was the most reluctant hero of them all.
And then we talk about
he faced his fears.
We're talking about the least valuable member. Even in the freaking Jeep, when Rudy's like, "Give me some slack," he's like, "No." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "Okay." And he gets him the slack and he shoots the arrow. And he also kills the mum. And he says, this isn't in my best line, but it is a deliciously great line where he says, "See you later, Band-Aid breath." That's such an 80s line. I love that line.
Total 80s
line. Rudy takes out more people than anybody else. He's like the killing machine of the Monster Squad.
He's the killing machine.
And to his credit, like I said, Sean is the mastermind. Sean plays a part in all this. He's the one who's seeking out the answers to Van Helsing and to Van Helsing's diary, the amulet, all the different things he does. He really does lead.
Yeah.
The only dead weight here is Patrick.
What a waste. What a shame to all Patricks to just fucking do absolutely dick in this movie.
And to his credit, when Sean, even in the end, he does have that final showdown with Dracula, and he stabs him with the stake, which is pretty badass.
Sean has his moment, but Patrick is like, "Oh, hey, remember those cards I made? Here, give one to the army guy." It's like, "Well, thanks a lot, Patrick. You're the first person out of the Monster Squad, okay?
Yeah,
at least
he did nothing.
He got us Frankenstein's monster, even you."
And she read the incantation.
Yeah, Phoebe actually saved everybody. Phoebe could be the most valuable squad member because she read the incantation that actually opened the hole to limbo. Patrick, boy, man, no way, dude. You're out of the Monster Squad.
And the worst part is, as you said, the one thing he tried to contribute was the virgin sister, and even that he got wrong.
Yeah, he just fucking shit the bed the whole fucking movie.
Yeah. 5-year-old Eugene, who's like, "Is she a virgin?" He helped out more than he did. He helped out more than Patrick did.
Everybody contributed except Patrick. Patrick was the least helpful of all.
Let's move on to best line. And there's not going to be one best line, Patrick. There's going to be a bunch because this is a movie chock full of great dialogue. Now, in a weird twist, you send me categories and I react. We've said that on the show many, many times. We don't prepare for this. We don't know ahead of time what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. You'd have no idea what I'm going to say.
Right.
Sometimes we sync up. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we agree. Sometimes we disagree. Not in a bad way. You'll have best performance. I'll have a different best performance. It's so funny that out of all of our best lines, we only shared one. I was like, "Oh, this is awesome," because we're going to have totally different lines for this movie. Now, to be fair, I could quote 90 lines from this movie. I could quote the entire movie. I could probably write it down at this point. But let's kick things off. I think we should go back and forth with our best lines in this movie.
Fair enough.
Now, the first one is the one we share. Okay. And that is great comic relief. So do you want to set this one up?
Is this Detective Sapper?
This is Detective Sapper, yes.
Oh, man. A fantastic performance by Stan Shaw as Detective Sapper, who is basically the sidekick cop to Sean's dad. And in the early going of this movie, when we realize monsters are running amok in this town, they are at the local museum where the mummy has disappeared. But that makes absolutely no sense to Detective Sapper. And he delivers what is a fantastic little diatribe here.
Here we go.
So let me get this straight. You telling me there was this 2,000-year-old mummy here, right?
Yes, sir.
But now he's not here. He's gone. Vanished. History. And you're saying you didn't hear anybody come in here or leave. Is that right? Can you hear me now? Hello?
I can hear you fine.
So nobody took the mummy?
I would have heard them.
Of course he would have. Stupid question. Did you take him?
No, sir.
Just a shot. That's it, Bill. This case is too hard, man. Let's be firemen instead.
He's a smartass. He's a total smartass, and he's a smartass through the whole movie. That's part of his charm, is that he just goes like, "This is insane. Are we saying a mummy walked away?" Like, and that, so he gives the security guard shit because he's like, "This isn't actual detective work. You know, you guys know that, right? Like, this is just stupid what we're doing." And so I always loved that. I always loved how funny he was in these moments.
That interrogation cracks me up every single time. And he's like, "Did you take him?" He goes, "Just a shot."
Just a shot. He's just entertaining himself at this point because he's like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, this case is too hard. Let's go be firemen instead.
Yeah.
It's so hilarious. One of my favorite moments. Now, I'm going to move on to best line, and I'm just going to kick things off right now. This is the most iconic line in Monster Squad. It's the one it's best known for. It's on all the T-shirts, and it even had a documentary named after it. And this is, of course, Horace's showdown with the Wolfman.
Kick him in the Nards! Kick him in the Nards! He doesn't have Nards! Do it! Wolfman's got Nards! Come on!
Wolfman's got Nard. That is the most iconic line from this movie. So
I can tell you with tons of experience because I once was 12 years old, and now I have these very small boys. Young boys are obsessed with penis. And because they have them and they're curious what else has them in the world. The fact that they had talked about earlier in the movie, they had set up the idea that, you know, the Wolfman wears jeans so you don't see his wolf dork. This is what 12-year-olds talk about. This is what they think about going on. So in that moment of realization that, like, oh my God, Wolfman has Nards. Like, I never would have thought of that. Like, by the way, if people are going, what the fuck is Nards? There might be some people out there generationally who doesn't know what that means. He's just saying balls. Like, these 12-year-old kids discovered, hey, the Wolfman has balls after all. Like, it's just such a funny, goofy, like, it's obviously very, very much played for comedic effect. But there's kids have a comic obsession with penis. And in this moment, they realize, well, actually, the truth is Wolfman does have nuts.
yeah, he's got balls. Kick him right in the balls is all they're saying. It's great. And he's like, Wolfman's got Nards. Patrick, let's talk about your next line with sweet little Phoebe.
Oh, sweet little Phoebe. It's the sweetest little girl. I just love what she says in this moment, and maybe we'll talk about it. talk about why I chose this right afterwards, aside from it being very funny.
It's okay, you guys. He's friends with us. Come on, don't be chicken shit.
Yeah, little Phoebe's telling all the older boys who think she doesn't belong, don't be afraid of Frankenstein. He's friends with us. Don't be chicken shit. First, it's just hilarious to hear a 5-year-old say, don't be chicken shit. Secondly, chicken shit is just like, it's a classic, like, insult that comes from our era particularly. There's stuff that has fallen away. Chicken shit was one of them. So I loved that little time capsule of hearing that.
It's the word that sends Marty McFly into a freaking rage and has him crashing cars back in Back to the Future. You call him chicken, he reacts pretty harshly, man. Marty McFly doesn't like that in Back to the Future. Yeah, it's just it's so cute. 5-year-old Phoebe going, don't be chicken shit. And you're like, oh, it's so cute. She says chicken shit. It's great. So now my next favorite line is my favorite comedy moment because I could not find the answer. I could not find the answer to this. I don't know if this was ad-libbed or not. Maybe it was, maybe it was in the script. I don't know, but this is such a great line. It's just a very short little line. It's at the end when Sean gears everybody up and he says, you know, nobody's going to stop them but us. Are we the Monster Squad or what? And they're like, all right, let's gear up and go. And they all put their hands in the center of the shot, and they all put in, and then the dog comes in and puts his paw on, and Rudy delivers this line, which to this day still cracks me up, and I still don't know the answer to this.
How does that dog get up here anyway?
It's a great question. How's the dog get up here anyways?
How does your dog get into the treehouse?
They established it's a ladder. It's a full-on ladder getting into the treehouse. How the hell do you get the dog up there?
Yeah, I'm assuming, and these are small kids, and it's like a beagle. Yeah. Like a beagle is about the size of a 12-year-old. Like, what do? Lug it? They firemen's carry it up with their shoulder? I don't think they do.
It's just hilarious when Rudy says he's like, "How's that dog get up here anyway?" It's always made me laugh.
And
Always made me laugh.
I don't know for sure, but I believe that might have actually been written into the script.
It's great. It's just
Yeah.
it's just such a hilarious, like, because it's true. Like, how the hell does the dog get up here? Patrick, your next best line is delivered by your most valuable squad member, and it also speaks to the fear he has in this movie.
It reiterates why I chose him as my most valuable character. This is when Horace is faced with the idea of actually descending into the haunted mansion where they know Dracula is. And he has some suggestions for Sean because, let's face it, Horace does not want to do this.
Sean, maybe we can be like Math Squad instead, you know. Do math problems, stay home, or Nature Squad. We could look at rocks, collect birds, not be dead. See, it's this whole death thing I'm not crazy about.
It's this whole death thing I'm not crazy about.
Do you know how scared a 12-year-old has to be to say, let's be Math Squad instead? Let's do math. Like, he's genuinely scared. So you're establishing through this whole movie that this boy is terrified of doing this. And so I love the character growth. And that's one of those pieces of evidence that just goes to show how scared he was.
So I have two final lines to throw out there. First off, and this, it's funny, back to back, and this was not planned. I promise this was not planned, but it's so perfect. Your most valuable squad member delivered that line. My most valuable squad member delivered this line, and it's just perfect antithesis of who Rudy is as a character. As he's face down, the monsters are coming, everyone's getting scared out of their minds, they can't get in the church, they're going to have it outside. He's like, why don't we just go do it over in front of Burger King, Sean? Like, he's like, real religious. Let's just go do it over in front of Burger King. Here comes Dracula's brides, and Rudy's just like, fuck this, I'm ready to go.
Where you going, Rudy?
I'm in the goddamn club, aren't I?
He just marches off. Rudy, where you going? I'm in the goddamn club, aren't I? And then the best line, my favorite line, the one that terrified me as a child, and the one that was like, yeah, they're not fucking around this movie, and that is delivered by the great Duncan Regehr to poor little Phoebe as she holds on, clutches onto that little amulet, and he wants that amulet.
Give me the amulet, you bitch!
So, little inside baseball. And again, you'll hear it later when we have the interview with Duncan Regehr on the show. And again, you can see this in Wolfman's Got Nards. They didn't tell Ashley Bank what Duncan was going to say to her in that moment. They said, he's going to pick you up and he's going to say something. And she's like, as a little 5-year-old girl, is like, well, when do I scream? And Fred Decker goes, you'll know. And her fear, that scream, that guttural scream you hear from her in that moment is legitimate. She was fucking terrified of Duncan Regehr in that moment when he picked her up and looked in her face and said, give me the amulet, you bitch. And then hissed at her and showed his fangs. She had no idea any of that was happening. That's genuine fear you're hearing in her voice when he says that to her.
Yeah, and also he hid from her the fangs and the red eyes and all that stuff. Before that, she'd only seen him in regular makeup. Andre Gower has a different version of that, where he says that in the first take they didn't get it right, and he says that what you're hearing is the second take. So there's some, but again, I go, how much does Andre Gower remember versus Fred Decker? Because Fred Decker seems to go with the original idea of it. So there's conflicting reports from two different people.
Well, that's also the version Duncan. That's also the version Duncan says.
Right. And for some reason, Andre thinks it's like, no, it was two takes strung together, because he said in the first take she didn't scream right enough, and so they had to do it again. So, but either way, if you didn't know that Dracula wasn't fucking around, like in that moment, it was solidified. You're like, oh, he's bad. Oh, he's nasty. Oh, he's terrible. And oh, he's about to kill a 5-year-old girl that he just called a bitch. Like, he's not a good guy. Like, there's no way if you were romanced by him at all through this movie, it leaves your body immediately in this moment because you're like, oh, all he needs to do at this point is fucking die. This guy is pure evil.
The fact that he said bitch to the 5-year-old girl, even though I'm like, again, there's nothing redeeming about this character. He was sociopathic. He was everything that he's supposed to be as an evil, vile Dracula. That moment is like the one that's just burned in my head forever because he's holding a 5-year-old child, lifts her in the air by her chin, kind of gives her a little smirk, and then says, hey, give me the amulet, you bitch. It's a 5-year-old child. You just called her a bitch. Oh my God. Like, that's just unheard of. Like, even today, you don't see that kind of stuff. Like, that's so hardcore. That is like one of the most hardcore horror film moments ever. And it's in a kid's horror film.
I know. It's in a kid's horror comedy. You're like, whoa, okay, that's a little intense.
It's so intense. But yeah, like, again, I don't know the conflicting reports. I'll go with the two guys who were actually one directing and in the scene. And they say she reacted the way she reacted because she had no idea it was coming. And she screamed her bloody murder because she got scared out of her mind when she heard, give me the amulet, you bitch. And he hissed at her and showed the fangs and the red eyes. And she freaked the fuck out. That sounds pretty realistic of what we saw on screen.
Yeah, it seems pretty. It's a fucking gnarly scene.
Let's move on to best gore. This isn't a particularly gory movie necessarily, but there's one scene in particular that is gory, but also what a brilliant piece of effects work. Patrick, go ahead and tee this one up.
Oh my God. Well, honestly, I was going to leave best gore out, but I was like, I do need to talk about this moment because it's technically not Wolfman dying. We're going to get to deaths in a moment. It's just when Sean and his dad are confronted by the Wolfman in an upstairs building, and they stuff a dynamite in his pants, shove him out a window, and he explodes. And it's a fantastic sequence. It's a really good sequence. And then they almost immediately cut to his gory, bloody parts laying on the street because he's just been exploded by a piece of dynamite. And there's bloody stumps and bloody limbs and a piece of a torso, and the Wolfman's kind of just the torso's moving a little bit. Like, fantastic Stan Winston stuff. Really, really good. And then you realize, because earlier in the movie they set this up with Rudy, how do you kill the Wolfman? And he goes, the only way to kill him is a silver bullet. And then they realize that they don't know any other ways to try and kill Wolfman. One of them is he falls out of a 2-story window onto a bomb. And that's exactly how he gets, hurt in this moment. But indeed, it cannot kill him. Right? Rudy's correct. It's only the silver bullet that can kill him. And in that moment, the exploded pieces start to move and then slide back together. It's the fucking coolest sequence I've ever seen of a Wolfman reanimating after being literally blown up. I was like, that is the coolest Wolfman magic I've ever seen.
So I love everything about that scene from the explosion, but I also love, I could quote this movie all day. There's another great moment when the Wolfman is just beating the absolute shit out of Sean's dad upstairs. And he's just kicking his ass, throwing him across the room. And then he goes, hey, asshole. And he turns around and he goes, you looked. And he smacks him with the baseball bat. That's just such a great 80s line. He's like, hey, asshole, you looked. And then smacks him. And then he takes that dynamite, sticks it in his pants, shoves him out the window. He explodes. When they fall on the ground, again, you talk about, like, you mention it, you got to show it to us, right? Like, if you mention it in the movie, you better show it to us. They had that whole debate. How do you kill a werewolf? And they try to convince Rudy there's another way besides the silver bullet. They're trying to fool him in their monster test. And he's not falling for it. There's a silver bullet. Of course, they have it come up in the end, and he explodes and he's on the ground. And then the great animatronics of the hand moving a little bit, the feet moving a little bit. You saw that in the coroner's van as well, but this is, of course, in bits and pieces. And then you see the torso, arm gone, one other arm half gone, blown up, the whole chunk of the body's gone, and then you just see him go, and then it just slides together. And I love my favorite part, because you're dealing with a certain budget, you can't actually show all the pieces coming back together. That'd probably be like half their budget right there, just like actually showing them reforming together, like molding back together, which I assume would be an effect where you would pull it apart and play it in reverse in the movie.
Something like that, yeah.
That was usually the camera trick they do. They pull it apart and then they do it in reverse. But they do it in such a way that it doesn't matter because they have all these pieces sliding back together, and then boom, it's together. You see the shadow, and you hear the howl. Yeah. It's such a great conclusion to all that gore. The gore they can show you of the pieces, the torso, the hands, the arms, everything. And then when it comes back together, you see the shadow of the Wolfman reformed. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that segues perfectly, Damon, because, again, Wolfman does not die there. We established he died by a silver bullet, because that's the only way you could kill a werewolf, by Rudy later on. The next category is best monster death, okay? Because all of these monsters, including even Sweet Frankenstein, they do meet their end. But, Damon, what was your favorite monster death?
My favorite monster death plays perfectly into what we just talked about, and that is the death of the Wolfman for one very specific reason. That scene's great, where the Wolfman's just tearing through the cop, which, by the way, they have so many cops just get their asses kicked and torn apart in this movie. It's like, again.
It's like all the cops in this town get killed.
the entire police force minus Sean's dad is gone by this point. But they all just get their asses kicked. They're all getting torn to pieces, and it looks like Rudy's the only hope. And so he grabs the cop's gun, he dumps out all the bullets, puts his one silver bullet in, puts it, and right as the Wolfman turns to look at him, he goes, boom, he goes, bang, and he falls down. Now, immediately, the Wolfman transforms back into the man, and as he's dying, reaching out with his hand, he goes, thank you, and then dies. I fucking love that death scene because, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that they play that kind of Jekyll and Hyde role of the Wolfman where he's not a willing participant. It's almost, again, it's a curse. It's like he got cursed to be a Wolfman, and he can't kill himself for whatever the reason is. We don't need to know every little intricacy of this guy's life, but we know that when the full moon comes out, he becomes a werewolf. And he wants to, he tries to get them to put him in a cage early in the film, lock me up. He tells Sean, they're going to kill your son. He's doing everything he can to stop what's happening, and he can't, because once he becomes the Wolfman, he becomes an unwilling participant in his own body. When Rudy shoots him dead, and he trembles and says, thank you, that's all he wanted. That was sweet relief. That's all he wanted. And that's why I love that death scene. It was the perfect payoff for that character, because everything you've gotten to know about that character up to that point is he does not want to be the Wolfman. He does not want to transform into this killing machine. He just has this curse, and he can't avoid it. And when Rudy kills him, he's putting him out of his misery.
Yeah, as I talked about earlier, I won't retread, a beautifully poetic death for the Wolfman. It's certainly, I think, one of the more emotionally impactful deaths in the entire movie. But the one that I picked, Damon, was just so damn fucking clever. And that is the death of the mummy. The mummy, the mummy is the Patrick of the bad guys. Like, he didn't do shit. I don't know what his function was in this movie other than to just be in the movie and put the kids in danger at one point, right? He's so slow. He literally is dragging his foot across. But at one point he does catch up to the kids and he latches on to Scary German Guy's car. Rudy, as we established, is, the expert monster killer in this group. He's got his bow and arrow. Patrick gives him reluctantly some slack, I believe. It was Patrick, right?
Yeah, because he calls him a wuss and he does it. Yeah.
So he gives him a little piece of the slack on the mummy's bandages that are keeping this reanimated corpse together. And, Rudy takes that bow and arrow and boom, he cinches it into a tree. And then, the mummy is still holding on, and you're watching the slack slowly start to tighten up. It's not going fast. It wasn't like a jumpy, actiony moment. They're still kind of wrestling with this ghoul who's reaching for them. And then finally, the slack goes tight. And when it does, they cut right to the mummy, and he's like, oh, shit. and the mummy starts to unwind. And what I loved was as the mummy unwound, and it's a brilliant piece of action. They cut to his foot, and you can see that there's nothing under the bandages. Like most of this mummy is gone and withered away. So as you have to imagine the director is visualizing that as the bandage is spinning rapidly, it's just disintegrating what maybe there might be under there, what maybe bits and pieces of tissue are under there. It fully unravels, and then the final reveal is that the bandages fall to the ground and just the skull rolls down and stops. It's such a clever way to kill the mummy. The idea that he was indeed just a curse wrapped up in bandages with a skull on top. I was just like, that's so fucking creative. Like that, it is, to me, it's the most creative kill. While the Wolfman kill is certainly the most emotionally impactful and most story-driven kill, the creativity of the mummy kill, it's been underappreciated for far too long, so I had to bring it up for this podcast.
It is definitely the most creative kill. I think the only thing that killed it for me a little bit is because what you said, he's the Patrick of the monsters, where he doesn't really do anything. So it's almost like, what danger was he really presenting to them? But it is a great scene that's really ingenious way of getting rid of the mummy. And of course, that is where Rudy delivers the see you later Band-Aid breath. Yeah. Great, but it's great ingenuity of getting rid of that character, because what is he? He's bandages wrapped up around a dead body. Okay, well, how do you get rid of it? Well, let's just unravel him. And it's a great little piece there. Like, how do you get rid of a mummy? Unravel the fucking mummy.
Yeah.
It's pretty ingenious, like when you think about it, you know.
I've never seen. They always deal in curses and like spells and all that shit. They were like, no, just unwrap him, and there's nothing under it. Like there's nothing holding. The only thing holding him together is those bandages. It's a very clever, fun way. It's actually a very fun death as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love that. See, I agree. That's a very ingenious way. And like I said, all the deaths are great. I mean, again, I think the Guildman gets the worst of it with just a shotgun. Like, dude, come on.
It's probably the most boring death of all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like just a shotgun. That's all it takes. All right.
Well, he is just a fish.
Yeah, I guess he's just a fish. All right, whatever. Next category, Patrick. This is going to be a bit of a controversial one, because I know this is going to hit us probably where it's going to hurt. Remake, sequel, or leave it alone. And this is the category where we, of course, take whatever movie we're reviewing and we say, should they remake it, should they sequelize it, or should they leave it alone? Now, a little bit of a teaser to the interview you're going to hear in a little bit with Duncan Regehr, who played Dracula. I asked him that in the thing. Like, do you think they should ever touch this? Because I argue...
Don't tell us what he says.
No, I argue that they've already, in a way, remade Monster Squad with Stranger Things, because Stranger Things is Monster Squad with the upside down versus the Universal Monsters, but you don't get Stranger Things without Monster Squad. I don't care if the Duffer Brothers said, we never saw Monster Squad, I'd say bullshit. You saw Monster Squad.
Oh, please, they saw Monster Squad.
that movie, that show is laced with DNA for Monster Squad. So, Patrick, remake, sequel, or leave it alone?
Brace yourself, because I'm going to say remake. Now,
podcast over, guys. This is a good run.
Podcast over. Everybody's done. Everybody has unsubscribed. Everybody's out. But here's the thing. No remake can ruin what the Monster Squad is. It's great. I can't stand when people go, you're fucking with my childhood. You ruined Star Wars, whatever you hear it all the fucking time in fandom. That shit doesn't go anywhere. They remade Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They've sequelized it a million times, and all those sequels have failed. It's never ruined Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me. It's never has. Their Alien Resurrection exists. It didn't ruin Alien for me. It doesn't ruin Sigourney Weaver for me. The only reason I say remake is because if we're talking reality here, most people don't know this movie. It's not a wildly popular movie. It's not even Blade Runner popular. Blade Runner is a cult classic. But if you remade this movie at the scale of Blade Runner, a lot of people would go, what the fuck is the Monster Squad? Oh, I guess it's some cool new movie. Most people don't really know what this movie is. It is literally the horror faithful who know this movie very intimately. And I would still argue, not only is it horror faithful, it's mainly like elder millennials and older that are even knowledgeable of this movie. I think younger millennials don't really know this movie. Like my younger brother doesn't really know the Monster Squad. He's only 6 years younger than me. He doesn't really know it. I was hanging out at work with some guys and I go, oh, we're going to do the Monster Squad for our 200th episode. They go, what's that? Some of those guys are my age. They've never heard of it. You can remake this movie and just bring some of the cool ideas of what that movie was to a whole new batch of people who will eventually go, oh, this was a remake of what? Oh, there was a movie from the 1980s. Cool. I didn't even know about that movie. And then they get to actually revisit the Monster Squad. And it's a cool idea. And I think you can, Stranger Things proves you can do this idea over and over again. People will watch it. People will tune in. We talked about Fear Street. The Fear Street trilogy's kind of the same shit. Pretty close, a little different. Lost Boys. Okay, I keep hearing that there's going to be a Lost Boys remake where they're going to be little kids. Well, that's basically Monster Squad. So I don't think it harms this glorious movie at all to do a remake. And if anything, it may bring some more people to the original.
So my only argument against remake, just to kind of throw this out there, and I joke about like, okay, we're done. And the reason I say I'm against this because I don't have a problem if you remake something like when you do what Zack Snyder did with Dawn of the Dead. The concept is the same, but the movie is wildly different. They call it Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, it takes place in a mall and it has zombies, but it shares no other real DNA with the George Romero classic. Now, here's the thing. I freaking love the George Romero original, and I also freaking love Zack Snyder's remake. If you do a Monster Squad remake and you do it in that vein, where you don't try to just copy what they did and it's just a 2024 version of the Monster Squad, it's just, the leader of the group, they just change the dynamics and they just basically make it again, except, it's almost like following a book. Like you can only change it when you start changing the book formula, then you ruin it. But that's why I say like Stranger Things is the Monster Squad remake in a lot of ways. It's in a TV version. It takes place in the 80s, which is kind of funny. But this movie is of such a time that I think it'd be hard to quote unquote remake it and keep that same charm in this era. So that's why I bump up against remake a little bit, unless you just take the concept of it all. Kids against monsters. Okay. But don't try to just remake it, because then you're going to compare the two, and one's perfect, and whatever you make is probably not going to be perfect. So it's going to be hard to compare the two. So my answer, surprisingly, isn't Leave It Alone. It is sequel.
Oh, I like that.
We just saw in 2018, the one time I'll give David Gordon Green credit, because it certainly is for Halloween Kills or Halloween Ends, or The Exorcist Believer.
Don't you dare start.
Halloween 2018 technically was a follow-up to 1979's Halloween. Now, yes, we know the history. There's a billion Halloween films between there, but he basically said, fuck all that. We're going to sequelize the original Halloween. And now, he took out the lore, the brother, the sister. He took everything out. This was literally the babysitter killer of 1979, got caught. He's been in prison until 2018 when he escapes. All that middle ground of everything else that ever came before that was eliminated. We just got from 19. This was a direct sequel to a movie that may have been 40 years earlier. They said every 100 years, the amulet, there's a moment when the amulet could be shattered. But what if there's something in mythology where that's not exactly true? What if there's some loophole to where the amulet can be destroyed in some other way, and you can bring back some of these characters? Now, we have to talk about this. Sadly, one of our Monster Squad is gone. Brent Challam, who played Horace, died tragically at 22 years of age. He got pneumonia, went to the hospital, and according to his family, they misdiagnosed him and they gave him the wrong medicine, and he ends up passing away. Sadly, Horace is no longer with us. Tragically, he's gone. So that's part of the problem. That's part of the sadness of the sequel idea. And of course, as I already mentioned earlier, Mary Ellen Trainor, who played the mom, she has also sadly passed away. And of course, Leonard Cimino, who played a scary German guy, he also passed away in 2012. So some of the key components of this movie have gone. But there's some elements that are still here. Andre Gower's still around. Obviously, Robert Kiger's still around. Ryan Lambert's still around. They just did this huge tour a few years ago, kind of reuniting to do, the tour for the 30th anniversary. And I just mentioned Duncan Regehr, still out there kicking ass, taking names.
Talking to Damon Martin.
Talking to me. Somebody could come up with an idea to do some sort of a Monster Squad sequel. Now, do I think it's going to be as good as the original? Do I think they can keep all the charm and everything? I don't know. But Halloween 2018 was pretty fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody, I don't know who, and listen, Fred Decker's still out there. Shane Black's still out there. They're not like gone. They're still around, very much around.
Yeah.
But if you could have that, and you mentioned in that documentary, like there's guys like Adam Green who did the Hatchet movies. There are huge fans of this movie in the horror space.
Yes.
Imagine, just let this wash over you for a second.
I'd love to.
Script by Shane Black and Fred Decker, directed by Mike Flanagan. The Monster Squad.
Listen, anything directed by Mike Flanagan sounds like a good idea.
Tell me you're not going to run to the fucking theater and see that thing. I'm just saying it's possible. Not even saying they're going to do it, not even saying it's the best idea. But of these three options, yes, Leave It Alone is easy, and that's what's been done since 1987. So that's the answer we're currently with is Leave It Alone, because no one's ever tried it, and maybe that's rightfully so. But I'm thinking there is a world where there's a pretty good sequel out of this, where you could do a pretty kick-ass sequel of some sort. If you do it right, and obviously like some of the characters, like Sean's going to now have kids, so you can still have kid actors in here. There's a sequel in here is all I'm saying, Patrick. There is a sequel in this movie.
I'm glad you feel this way. I'm glad that that you didn't stonewall and go, no, this is untouchable. This is hallowed ground. 2018's Halloween is a prime example of why you can do this. I argue Halloween 2018, you don't even have to have seen the original Halloween to enjoy and understand everything that's going on in Halloween 2018. You can fully understand the movie, and the diehards will get all the nods to the old movie, but it's designed as a movie that can literally, you can sit down and have no knowledge of the original movie. So I combine our answers and say, well, why not we just make a modern Monster Squad that is a sequel, but it doesn't have to we don't have to call it Monster Squad 2. Just call it the Monster Squad. They called Halloween 2018 Halloween. They just called it Halloween. Just call this Monster Squad. It's a sequel, but it's also just clearly its own contained story that will give you plenty of nods to the people who know and love the movie. I think it's a great compromise.
Yeah. Andre Gower's now a cop like his dad. His dad's retired. Stephen Mocht is still around. He still does stuff.
Yeah, he's
here. Retired now. Andre Gower's now the cop. Patrick's probably, working at Burger King being useless.
He is fully useless, yes. Phoebe is a grown woman who's like, yeah, Frankenstein was my first boyfriend.
Yeah, and then you got Rudy, who now owns his own motorcycle shop, and he's like a total badass. He became exactly what you think he'd become. He's still a badass owning his own motorcycle shop, and he married Patrick's sister. They got together.
Yeah, she's still around. She's still here.
Yeah, little things like, dude, you could do it. You could pull this off 100%. And now Eugene is in the army. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, he's an army general now. And it's like there's plenty to mine from.
Yeah, and Eugene was, very much like didn't really play a major role, didn't really do anything. How funny would it be at the end is like have the army show up and it's Eugene leading the troops. And like, great to show up on time, Eugene. Shit.
Yeah, no, there's fully potential, and I'm glad you see it that way too. I'm glad you aren't just like hardline about no, you don't touch this. It's like there's room to touch this, and again, I'm telling you. There's a lot of untapped audience that has no clue. And I'm even speaking for people our age who have no clue what the Monster Squad is. Let's just do it. Let's make another one, whether it's a remake or a sequel or a prequel or a requel or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Let's make some more. Like, why not? This is a fun world to play in, okay? It doesn't need to be the first. It doesn't need to be perfect like the first. Let it be its thing, and it could be fun.
Yeah, do a sequel. Like I said, I think it's an interesting conversation. And if, dude, you get Duncan Regehr back as Dracula one more time,
I'd be into that.
that's what I'm saying. I'm just throwing the idea. I think it's still something that could work. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So, Patrick, let's talk about, can we survive this horror film? And Patrick, listen, this is iconic for you and I. We grew up loving this movie. We grew up believing we were in the Monster Squad. I made Monster Squad business cards when I was a kid because that's how badly I wanted to be in the Monster Squad. I know the answer. Are we surviving?
We're making
of course we're
Hell
making
yeah.
it. Of course we're making it.
Every kid is preparing themselves to take on the monsters. And then Monster Squad proved that the kids can win. That's hands down. The moral of the story is that kids can win against monsters. So the answer is absolutely we survived this horror film. Because we were those kids. We are reflected in those kids. I would have done the things those kids would have done because they were painted very well like real little kids. I'm 100% surviving this, and I'm going on to be a full-fledged Monster Squad member.
Yeah, I love it because the people who die in this movie, the people who get their asses kicked, are the ones who don't want to believe monsters exist. The cops, the adults, they're the ones who don't believe in this shit, and they're the ones who get taken out. The kids are the ones who are like, I believe in monsters, and we're going to stop them. And so, yeah, of course we survived. Come on now. You said earlier you were Rudy, I was Sean. Hell yeah, we're going to survive. You're going to be out there shooting Dracula's brides, and I'm going to stab Dracula with a stake before he gets pulled up into limbo. Of course I'm going to make it out of this movie because we're the ones who believed this. We wanted to believe in this. When I saw this movie, I was like, shit, yeah, this is my wheelhouse. I want to believe in monsters. So 100% we're making it out of here. And I'm just getting chills, man. How cool would that have been, man? It's just such a fun concept, man. It's such a great movie.
It fulfills a wonderful childhood fantasy. And I think every horror person, if you have not seen the Monster Squad, it fulfills something that's deep inside your heart as a horror fan. You have to witness this movie, and it'll make you believe kids can beat monsters. It's fantastic.
I love it. Our last category before we get to our interview with Duncan Regehr, and that is it scary? And I'll go first here, Patrick. So this is, as we said, this is a perfect kids horror film because it does so many things right and also does so many things differently than other kids horror films. There's not a lot of, when I think of kids horror films, I'm thinking of I don't even really know a great example. I guess Goonies is like a kids adventure movie, but most of you think of kids horror films, you're thinking of kids movies that just have a horror tinge to them or a Halloween tinge to them or, Nightmare Before Christmas, whatever. Is this scary? Fuck yeah, it's scary for a kid. And I already explained, I'm not going to rehash myself 1,000 times over. When Dracula grabs Phoebe and calls her a bitch and shows her his fangs, and you realize these monsters are not playing around. They don't give a shit that you're 12 years old. They're going to kill you to get what they want. That's terrifying. Not in the traditional sense of was I, shaking in my, I was excited throughout this entire movie when I was a kid. I was like, I love this is amazing. But the peril that they injected, the real peril they injected in these kids, even though none of the kids in the movie actually died, you can't tell me you watch the movie thinking there's a good chance one of these kids might not make it because that's how serious the monsters were. So yeah, in 1987 or 88, 89, whenever I saw this movie the first time, it was scary because it felt real, because it felt like these monsters were real. So that's why I say, yes, it is scary for that era. Now, is it actually scary? No, it's not. It's not made to be that way. But this was a film that raised the stakes because when I watched The Goonies, going back to that, I never felt like the kids were actually in danger. I never once, really, truly thought these kids were not going to make it. There were moments in Monster Squad where I'm like, oh, he's about to bite Phoebe's head off.
I think you're absolutely right. I do think that this is a harrowing film for kids. It's thrilling. It kind of scares my little kids. They when they first saw this movie, they were a little freaked out. The opening has that Van Helsing battle. Zombies come out of the ground and there's bloody Dracula's brides and all that stuff. It's an intense cold open. And then when they realize these monsters are actually scary and they're portrayed as scary, for kids, that's scary. Now they weren't having nightmares or anything, but they were thrilled by it. And the thrill is very much an element of the scare. And like you said, all these monsters, they don't fuck around, especially Dracula don't fuck around. So you know deep down these kids are in danger. And that is scarier than anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Monster Squad, it is out there. Go watch it. It's on streaming. Of course, you can buy it. I'm a big physical media collector. It is on 4K now through Kino Lorber, I think is the label that did it. It looks incredible. I just watched it a couple nights ago to get ready for this podcast. It also, the 4K, if you can find it, comes with the 4K, the Blu-ray, and it comes with a copy of Wolfman's Got Nards, the documentary, on an actual physical disc. So I would highly recommend picking that up, but if nothing else, go check it out on streaming. I know you can actually watch the Wolfman's Got Nards documentary on YouTube as well, but yeah, so it's out there. I assume at this point, you stuck around this long, you probably have seen Monster Squad, but revisit it. It's the perfect film. It's perfect. It's absolutely, there's untouchable. It's iconic. And before we get to our interview with Duncan Regard, let's talk about one thing we wanted to mention to kind of cap off our show for a very special 200th episode.
Yeah, Damon, it's very eerie. You and I are not superstitious guys or anything like that, but we knew we were doing this 200th episode. We knew it was going to be super special, and I really hope that the person who wrote this is listening right now, because we got this message days before we decided we were going to do the 200th episode, and this person they wrote a review, a 5-star review, which helps us tremendously on Apple Podcasts. And this person went by Benna DCC. And the title of their review was Spooky Bro Vibes, which I guess is us. But I couldn't believe this message came to us right before our 200th episode. Okay, so I'm going to get a little emotional in my review, so don't mind me. One of my good friends passed away recently, and she loved your podcast. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be listening to you. She started listening from episode 00. She said it best, and I quote, "You know how sometimes you have two older bros vibing with all the right things, and you just get it? That's them," unquote. Which is weird, but to us, it makes sense. We played your Lost Boys review after her funeral because it was her favorite one. She too sucked off that movie, which is what we've said about the Lost Boys ever since we talked about it. Anyway, thank you too for being fantastic and being movie buffs without being film jerks. Thank you for being so awesome. And thank you for always re-sparking my love for horror in every new episode. Damon, movies are my passion. And talking about them with one of my best friends in the world, Damon Martin, is my pleasure. And getting a message like that and knowing that there are people that listen to us, and this poor person, I don't know their name, they passed away after listening to all of our episodes and missing, I don't know when exactly they missed, but they missed our 200th episode. But having people that listen and that we have impacted in some way, shape, or form is my absolute privilege. It's unreal that we get a message like that. And to whoever that is, you please email us at rotlivingdead@gmail.com, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Email us and we'll try and send you something. It means the absolute world to us that people listen. And I'm so very sorry that you lost your friend. And we're so very humbled that your friend was a fan in that respect. It means the absolute world to us, because we would do this if nobody listened. But when we know that people listen, it makes us feel amazing. And when we know now that we've lost a dedicated fan before our 200th episode, it's heartbreaking, but we're also very grateful for all the time that they gave us. Thank you. Thank you to all of our fans for letting us do 200 episodes. It means everything to us.
I've said this before, and I mean this because I love every single person that listens to us, whether you listen to one episode or you listen to all 200. But I'm honest when I say this. I love doing this podcast. It's like my little vacation every week. I get to talk about a horror film for 2 hours, and it's just an absolute blast. And I've said this on and off the air. If we had no listeners, I'd still want to do it because this is just so much fun. It's just so much fun to do this podcast. But the fact that we do have listeners who care and wait for the new episodes and get excited when we talk about films makes me feel so incredibly good because I love talking about films. I love horror. It's my favorite genre. Patrick, you told me about this review like a week ago, and I was like, I'll read it. You know, I'll wait till we put the new episode up. And so
I didn't tell you anything about it.
Yeah, you said you need to read this review, and I said I'll read it when I put up the new episode because when I put up the episodes, I go into all the platforms and make sure everything's processed okay. And so I put up the Watchers a few days ago, and I went on Apple afterwards to get the link for our podcast. I was like, oh yeah, I need to look at that review. And I looked at the review, and my jaw hit the floor. Now, to be fair, I want to say this. We appreciate every single person listening to this show. Just, I love you all for listening. But that one hit me right in the gut, and I was just flabbergasted. I was stunned. I just couldn't believe that we touched someone in that way to the point where, we were somewhat cathartic help in the aftermath of losing a friend that you put on our episode of Lost Boys and made you remember your friend. That means the absolute world to me. Listen, we're fans at the end of the day. We're fans. And as I said earlier, we are unabashedly brutal. We will tell you the truth. We will never sugarcoat things. If we love something, like the Monster Squad or Lost Boys, yes, we will sit there and fillet it for 2 hours straight. If we don't like something, like let's say Halloween Ends, we will tell you that it's the worst piece of shit that's ever been put on film. But understand that everything we do on this podcast comes from us loving film and being fans. The fact that we have fans, the fact that we have people that tune in and listen to the show, and that we can mean that much to a person. I'm an English literature major. I'm a writer for a living, and even I can't really come up with the words to tell you how much that means to us. So to that person, thank you. To all your friends that were around when that person passed away and you listened to our show to just pay tribute, thank you. Please email us. We definitely want to hear from you. If you're listening to this episode, we want to hear from you. And to everyone, 200 episodes, pretty wild. We got together as a couple of guys who met at Comic-Con years ago and said, why don't we do a horror movie podcast? No one's doing what we want to do. We want to do deep dives on one movie a week. Let's do it. 200 episodes, and several years later, here the fuck we still are. Wild. And we're not going anywhere, by the way. This isn't like something like, goodbye episode. We're going nowhere. But that review really did hit us. I showed it to my girlfriend, and she just was like, eyes open, like, oh my God, like that's insane. So thank you for whoever wrote that. And please reach out to us. We do want to send you something, but just to everyone, thank you for listening. And we appreciate every single person, whether you listen to one episode or you listen to all 200. And yeah, well, we got a couple more hundred in us. I promise you that.
Oh, at least 100 more. If another David Gordon Green movie comes out that we don't like, we may drop dead from just being so pissed off. But truth be told, getting a message like that right on the crest of our 200th episode is incredibly powerful, and it humbles us that we're in other people's lives. Thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. In the case of tonight, a lot of your time, because listen, we will go on and on and on about things that we love, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Absolutely. So, as we close things out here, of course, on the Monster Squad, our 200th episode, thank you to everyone that tunes into the show. I'm not going to give my normal end of the show, go listen to the podcast, go send us emails. We're going to close things out this week with a special interview to kind of say goodbye to this episode. And this was something very cool for us to do. An interview with the man himself who played Dracula in the Monster Squad, Duncan Regar. And also, if you watch us on YouTube. We're going to cut this part out separately so you can actually just go watch it as its own individual interview with me talking to the man who played Dracula in Monster Squad. So, you know, if you listen to this episode and you're like, I just want to hear what Duncan Regar has to say about the movie, you can watch it separately on YouTube and just actually watch the interview with me and Duncan speaking about how he got casted, the audition process, doing the movie, the aftermath, the fandom that's grown from this movie. We talk about everything. So here is my interview with Duncan Regar, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thank you all for tuning in for 200 episodes. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you soon.
Peace, you bitch.
As we continue to celebrate our 200th episode, talking about one of our all-time favorite movies, The Monster Squad, I couldn't be more honored or happier to be joined today by one of the stars of that film, and in my opinion, the definitive performance of Dracula on film. And I'm not saying that just because I'm about to talk to him. It is my great pleasure to speak today to Duncan Regar. Duncan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How about yourself?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. I got to be honest, it's so funny. Over the years, I've always heard people mispronounce your name, and I stressed about it so much I had to watch like 4 interviews to make sure I got it right.
Well done.
So obviously,
over the years, I've heard everything. I mean, it comes out, you know, Regaher, bizarre. It's been, you know, it's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So a lot I want to talk to you about, of course, but I guess, you know, here we are in our 200th episode. We were kind of debating about like what we wanted to do, you know, in terms of like celebrating and just kind of like doing something special. And we talked amongst ourselves and we said, I think it's time we finally review The Monster Squad because it's one of our favorite movies. It's a formative movie for me and my co-host. Is it wild? Like, you've done so much in your career, of course, but is it wild? Like, this has such an endearing quality with fans all these years later.
Yeah, it still never ceases to amaze me that it became a kind of cult film very early on. Actually, it didn't do that well at the box office to begin with, but people stayed with it. It's become, you know, cross-generational in a way because we get, you know, people who watched when it first came out are now grandparents and their children watched it and introduced it to their children. So, you know, everybody watches it. And the body of the audience seems to get bigger every year instead of less.
I love it. I love it.
It is a phenomenon, really.
Absolutely. Let me backtrack with you because I've seen, you know, the documentary, you know, that Andre Gower did. I've watched the behind the scenes and things like that. But let me take you all the way back to go ahead.
And just to interject that, you know, what Andre has done with that documentary has also increased, you know, the visibility of this particular film and encouraged the fans to expand in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I absolutely loved it. It was so fun just to see everybody talking about that, and because again, as you said, this was not a film. You know, being honest, this was not a film that just took off and did bonkers at the box office. It took a few years, and now I know that Fred Decker said he doesn't like to use the word cult classic, but this is a cult classic. Like, this is a film that just lives with generations of horror fans and just fans in general. But again, it didn't find its audience right away.
No, that's true. That's true, and it is a cult classic. I mean, that's what it is. I guess that's the category that it would fit into. I don't know what other category. I wonder which category Fred would think it would go in, or maybe he doesn't think there's a category for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start back at let me start back at the beginning in terms of like casting, because I again, watching that documentary, Fred was talking about, because he had been kind of inspired by the whole, you know, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, where it was a comedy, but Frankenstein's monster was very real. It wasn't like played campy or jokey. He was very serious, and so he kind of wanted to inject that into his film. And he said that, you know, when actors came in to audition for Dracula, if they had that kind of campy John Waters feel, he just like, you know, thanks for coming in, see you later. So let me start with you and saying, like, when did you hear, was this a project your agent brought to you? Was this something you heard about? Like, how did you get involved with actually auditioning for the Monster Squad?
Well, I came through my manager, I think, at the time. Yeah. I mean, it's a long time ago, so it's hard to remember exactly how it may have arrived, but I believe that's what it was. And said, do you want to go in for this? And sure, Dracula, are you kidding? Of course.
What
So
do what do you remember about that audition process? Because he, like I said, obviously there's a lot of people. It's an audition, so there's a lot of people trying to. And I love what he said about that. He said anyone that kind of had a certain take on it, he just, yeah, he wasn't interested in that. He wanted a very serious take. So when you went in, obviously you nailed it. He said when you showed up, he just knew you were Dracula. So what do you remember about that audition?
I actually remember quite a lengthy audition sort of process, and I think there were other contenders who were going in and out and visiting the offices and sitting down and talking with him, and he was very serious about what he wanted. And my approach to the character was actually a little bit different from his, and I was persistent with it. Um, and I explained it fully, I think, and he went with it. Ultimately, he and Peter Hyams and the other producers and what have you felt that it sort of had something that worked for it. True evil, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think that that shows through so much of the performance. Now, can I ask you one of those weird internet questions that gets out there? Because you read a lot of things about films, you see the documentaries. I saw a million rumors that basically it was down to you and Liam Neeson. Is that true? Liam Neeson auditioned for that role. Did you ever hear about that?
I heard about that too. Yes, I think he was going in. Yeah, he's a marvelous actor. He's one of my favorite actors, actually. Yeah, I guess so. I've heard all of the rumors too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I met him once, but I've never really asked him about that. I mean, just said hello.
Yeah. I was always curious. I was like, I mean, listen, I couldn't imagine anyone else being in that role, but I mean, listen, Liam's an incredible actor in his own right. With that being said, obviously, when you do a character like Dracula, there's a lot of interpretations out there. Bela Lugosi, very famously, of course, so iconic. Of course, Christopher Lee did his versions of the Hammer films, but your performance was so, to me, wildly different than anything I had seen out of a Dracula character before. How much did you look at those past performances and either not allow them to influence you or to influence you? Because I'm curious, because there's so many different interpretations of Dracula. It's such a famous character, has been in film for over 100 years.
Well, I think the project came with certain parameters. I knew that it had to have a sort of an iconic quality that related to previous Draculas, particularly the Bela Lugosi ones and the stuff that he did, costume, etc., that sort of thing, bearing. It had to have that attached to it. But to appeal to that back then contemporary audience, and I suppose today contemporary audience, but back then, I wanted to apply a lot more human characteristics to it, in the sense of him being sociopathic rather than just bestial and monstrous and slavering and biting people's necks, that sort of thing. That we have enough of that. And I thought, well, we would try to put more of a psychological spin on it, and in a limited sort of way, humor. To take the edge off whatever his dire actions were. And to make it lighter, because it is kind of lighthearted and family oriented and that sort of thing. So there were all those components that I was juggling. Plus, as I say, you had to have that iconic stature to it, a bit of grace to it. And yeah, that's how I kind of went after it. It just sort of evolved that way. And plus, I like to approach a lot of roles. I'm an artist, so I paint a lot, and I approach a lot of my roles and characters by making drawings and experimenting with what comes from the drawing to me as a way of suggesting to convey it as an actor.
Yeah. Do you remember the first costume fitting when you first got in the outfit and actually got the makeup and everything done? Because you get the fangs in, the contacts, the hair slicked back. Do you remember that moment, when you officially became Dracula? Because you can audition, you're going through the whole process, but when you're first day of filming, I mean, that's got to be cool because you're in the outfit. I mean, you didn't have to go quite through what I think it was Tom Woodruff Jr. did. He did the Gill Man, where they thought they had to glue him in the suit. You didn't have to go through quite the process.
No, I know, that was the nice thing about that character, was that I didn't have to put up with all of the heavy makeups. Well, in a few places I did. There were, contacts and, a little bit of that sort of thing. But No, I just remember that it comes to life. You inhabit the costume, you inhabit the character. And I don't remember a specific moment, but I know that's how it kind of came about. You suddenly stand there and you feel the character. You are the you embody it, or it embodies you, if you like. It happens that way. And so I always felt
There
that he was
was
sailing along. He'd sort of breeze into a place, glide in, and take
yeah.
over.
Absolutely, absolutely. The way I describe the performance is deliciously evil. That's the way I've always described the performance, because it's
way to describe it. Yeah.
it. But what I loved about it also was because when obviously I saw it originally as a kid growing up. I went to the video store, rented the VHS, and watched it, and then wore out the VHS because I'd watched it so many times. But kids films, kids horror films at that time, there was always a little tongue in cheek there, right? Like even like a film that comes up a lot with Monster Squad is Goonies, of course.
Yeah.
And even the villains, and I think Anne Ramsey, the other characters, obviously Joe Pantoliano, the characters, the bad guys in that film, they're kind of it's kind of like over the top, little comedy, little goofy, you know what I mean? So there's you never feel like the kids are truly in danger, if that makes sense. Like it was always kind of campy and kind of goofy, and the villains were not truly like evil.
Right.
When I watched Monster Squad and your performance of Dracula, I was terrified. Like that was like the scariest version of a horror film I had seen at that point, because I was like, this doesn't happen in kids' films. These are kids who are 12 years old and they're being attacked by Dracula. Like that, I imagine that's a big part of what makes this film work so well, is that it actually is scary for kids.
Yeah, it is. It is, I guess. I mean, and I think, going back to the audition process, I think that's probably what sold it. They decided, this guy's reached into the diabolical, and that's who he is. Totally evil. But yeah, and I think, also working at that time when, Andre and the rest of the children, they were children, there was still an innocence to them that I don't think exists today. Kids are inundated, got social media and, all the, information from the internet. It's all expanded. And I think back then there was an innocence to it. So when the kids were frightened, acting frightened, they were actually frightened. And I think children can relate to the truth of that. I don't think they know when they're being faked out. They can feel it. They actually feel it. Because those kids, well, as little actors, really were frightened at times, especially Phoebe.
I want to get to that particular scene in just a second, but can I ask you, because watching the documentary and you were talking about, I want to get to that scene in particular. We're going to talk about Phoebe, but how much, like, when you were on set, because I hear this all the time in a lot of movies, that when you're playing a certain character, they don't want to interact with the, like, especially in horror films, like they don't want you to see them. They want your reaction to be natural when you see them in the costume the first time, or when they're trying to scare you. They don't want to be around you. They want to have a genuine, like, I know that, I think Jodie Foster said, like, she never met or interacted with Anthony Hopkins at all when they were filming Silence of the Lambs, because he wanted to genuinely, like, terrify her when they were interacting, and then obviously they became friends afterwards. Did you interact with the kids, like, before filming? Did you try to stay separate? Like, how was it?
No, they terrified me. So no, I think, and that was kind of the approach I took to it, was that they would feel very much more frightened by that. It worked. I think with Frankie, the character of Frankie, he sort of took a different approach and maybe sort of reached out to them. He wasn't going to frighten them. He had to be empathetic and sort of, was involved with them. But no, definitely I stayed away from them.
Yeah. Now the scene, of course, with Phoebe, the famous scene, lifting her in the air, and I don't want to just retell what was said in the documentary, but that was this, and I know it's towards the tail end of the movie, but that's my favorite line in the movie, my favorite moment in the movie, because that was the moment where I was like, this is real. Like, these kids are in peril, danger at this moment, because you generally don't see a little kid like that. Even the older kids, when they were 12, 13 years old, even they, you don't see a 5-year-old girl lifted in the air and have that moment happen. That just that to me is my most iconic moment of that film. That's the one that always stands out to me. I have stickers on my laptop of that particular moment in the film. What do you remember? Like, because I think you said in the documentary, like Ashley, the actress, like she had no idea what you were going to say to her. Is that right? Like, am I getting that right?
Oh yeah, I don't think she did at all. She had no idea what was going to happen. And could she scream? Oh, God. As I say, I was terrified too. I was terrified of whatever it was that I was doing was frightening me.
Yeah,
I think, and certainly terrified her. Yeah.
it's
powerful, but give me the amulet, you bitch, is not, today is really, it's nothing. But back then, wow, that was powerful.
That's the one, because I'm thinking, and just to being honest, like when you say bitch, like in the little kid, I was like, oh my God, this guy's gonna kill her. Like that was like this most terror. You just never see it coming, and I was like, that is the most iconic line in that film, and that's the one that always scares me. Because again, and I'm curious because I saw when you said like she screamed, like the first time she did it, they said she screamed and like almost went silent because she was so scared. And and they had to redo it to get her a better scream. Was that right?
I don't actually remember that. I don't recall that, but it's a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, I guess we did it a couple of times. It's all a bit of a blur.
Yeah. Afterward, like in that moment, because again, this is all genuine. I think I saw it when Fred said in the documentary, he said, she's like, when do I scream? He said, you'll know. You'll know when to scream. And certainly she did, because that was terrifying. After you cut, after it's all over, in that moment, are you like giving her a hug? Like, are you okay? Because I mean, that would as a kid, like even as an actor, like she's not screaming because obviously she's acting screaming, but she was terrified at that moment.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, we all kind of looked after her afterwards, but I think she was pretty wary of me for a long time.
There, that entire process, and it did seem like everyone really enjoyed making the film, and I know everyone that I've seen in Aftermath say that was one of their favorite experiences. How was it, like, looking back on it now, in terms of just like you've done a lot of things, I mean, obviously not too long after this, you did Zorro and you did all these other things you've done. So I don't want you to rate your favorite performances, but looking back at that, like, how was that overall experience? Did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? Because you're playing such an iconic character, but you're a serious actor, so you're taking it seriously. So how much do you remember? Like, how much did you enjoy that entire process of making?
Oh no, I loved it as much as any other role. I just and I do it again in a heartbeat, but I do it different, of course. Yeah, I loved it. It was good fun. Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? It was an experience, and I mean, there were challenges certainly within it, working challenges that were difficulties, but and there always are. But it's part of the overall experience. It's not just a joyride. It's it's work, and everybody kind of pulls together regardless of whether they have different opinions about things or not. They try to pull together, and it makes it work. And sometimes those different opinions create a dynamic out of it, and it propels it forward even more.
I know you've been told this, and I said at the top of the interview, and I'm not, I'm sure it, you hear this, and I know what your reaction probably will be, but again, there are a lot of iconic performances of Dracula. It's such a famous character. Everyone brings up Bela Lugosi, of course. It's an iconic performance. Yeah. I love Christopher Lee as well, but. And I'm saying this not just because I'm talking to you. We've actually done podcasts in the past where we've done our favorite villains, favorite things like that, and without even preparing for it, my favorite performance of all time of Dracula is yours. That to me is the most iconic, best performance.
Flattered. Like, deeply flattered.
Do you appreciate? And I know there's been rankings and all this kind of stuff out there, but like that one performance, it seems like that always comes up again. Do you appreciate that? Like even all these years later, that people like myself, like to me, you are Dracula. Like your performance. Like I love Bela Lugosi. I don't want to knock what anyone else has done, but when I think of my favorite Dracula, it is Duncan Regehr's Dracula.
Well, I am deeply flattered, and I'm flattered to even be on the list of ranking, with people like Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee. I mean, come on, they're iconic in themselves as actors.
Yeah. This, and as I said earlier, this performance kind of lives on forever. Obviously, I know you do appearances. You have some conventions coming up. I'm going to mention those in just a second. When you meet fans, because obviously you're going to meet fans who saw it when they were kids, when it came out in 1987, but you mentioned like they're kids of this generation. Like my co-host, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, he had to work. He has kids who are like 9 and 8 years old, and they saw Monster Squad, and they freaking loved it. They absolutely loved it. And of course, they're 9 and 8 years old. Is it wild when you go to these conventions and you meet people like generational fans, like people who were kids in 87 and now they have kids, or as you say, grandkids who are watching Monster Squad in 2024 and loving it just the same as we did when we were kids?
Yeah. No, it's fabulous to to be in contact with that. That's the thing that I really like about those conventions, is when whole families come up and you get to meet the kids, and the kids are always, they're really not sure who I am. They've seen the movie and I don't look anything like I did in the movie, and it's so long ago, and I look like Dracula's grandfather now. Yeah.
You might have to hiss at them one time and they'll figure out real quick who you are.
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah, there you go.
So obviously, and I'm curious because let me just mention. Obviously, you have a couple things coming up here that you're going to be making some appearances at. I want to mention those in August the 9th through 11th. New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival, New Jersey Expo Center in Edison, New Jersey, and then Galaxy Con Nightmare Weekend, Des Moines, Iowa, September 27th through the 29th, and Galaxy Con Richmond, Virginia, October 11th through the 13th. Now, I know when you do these appearances, there's always, they do a lot. Like, I assume you still see a lot of the cast members when you do these appearances, like whoever's going to be there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, Ashley Banks is going to be there, and, Stephen Macht, and, all of them, Michael.
Yeah. Is it fun to, listen, when you do an interview like this, of course you're going to look back and talk about it, but I assume that when you see all those folks, it's still fun to reminisce and be together all these years later. Like, again, when I watched that documentary, it was just so fun to see everyone back together again, like seeing everybody, when they did the tour for the anniversary and everything. So I imagine when you run into everybody, it's almost like family in a way. Like, these are people you've shared a lot of experiences with.
A little bit, but that family has sort of formed since Monster Squad. We didn't really, hang out or socialize during the filming of it. But over the years, we've run into each other enough times that we can now say, well, how's the family? What's your husband up to these days? Or how are the kids? So yeah. And of course, you do socialize when you're at these conventions with your friends, and so it's become like a big family.
Let me ask you, the influence of this film, and again, I'm not even sure how much you even pay attention to things like this, but like there are projects now. One in particular I always bring up is Stranger Things, huge show on Netflix, massive success. And I've said this to many people when I've done interviews and I've talked to cast members. I say, I don't think Stranger Things exists without Monster Squad, because I think their take on it is being more serious with like the villains and no campiness, no that feeling. And then the kids, kind of arming themselves up and teaming up to go against the bad guys. Do you feel that influence? Again, I don't even know how much you're seeing these projects out there, but like, I feel like this is one of the most influential movies because it has stuck with people for so long. Like, here I am, we did our 200th episode. I was like, yeah, we got to do Monster Squad. Like, of course we got to do Monster Squad. Do you still see that? I still see that influence out there constantly.
Oh yeah. I think it is the way we roll forward. There's kind of a DNA that starts to, if you will, it's sort of definitely the influences are there. From projects like this, always influenced by copying necessarily. It's just that there's a sense that it's there. that it's this is what it is. It's not that you even have to, dissect it or deconstruct it in any way. It's just there. Yeah, I think that you're right.
I'm gonna ask you one last question. I almost fear putting this out in the universe, but I'm gonna say it anyways because I know this is gonna come up at some point. We're in an age now where everything gets rebooted, remade, rehashed, however you want to say it, and I've always lived in fear that someone would try to remake Monster Squad because it is such an iconic film. How would you feel about that if someone ever tried to take a stab at that and tried to remake that film or reboot that film, whatever it was? Like, unless the original cast was somehow involved, that would be the only way I'd want it to happen. How would you feel about that? Because we do live in that era where, again, Dracula's a character that's been around for years. There's probably hundreds of interpretations of Dracula between TV and film. But how would you feel about that? Because we live in that world now where it just happens.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I think it relates back to what you were saying before about, and what I was saying about influence and DNA. Yes, Monster Squad has been remade in another way many, many times. But what's the point? Why would you remake a classic like this? I don't know. I don't know that it would be, well, you would definitely have better special effects, what have you. Perhaps a different storyline. They would have the hero would be a girl this time. That's contemporary, probably. So it would be a little different.
Yeah, I just hope it never. I hope it never happens myself. I hope it never happens.
The thing is, in making it different, then it isn't like the original Monster Squad. It's something different. It will have to be something different. There's no point in just remaking it and trying to make it exactly like the old Monster Squad because that's what you already have, right? I'm just kind of like, why would you? But if they did remake it and I was going to be a part of it, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, that would be the only way. If you come back, if some of the cast comes back, that would be the only way I would be interested in that film. That would be now that would get me interested.
Yeah, me too.
Real quick before I let you go, Duncan, beyond your acting career, I know you're also an artist, and I've seen some of your work. I was a bit of an amateur. Actually, I started in college in art, and then I realized, wow, I'm not nearly as good as these other artists, and so I switched to English literature. When I was in college, became a writer instead of an artist. But you're incredible. Can I ask, what kind of mediums do you like to work with? Is it oil painting? What kind of mediums do you like to work with in your art?
I use everything. I mean, over the years, it's a career of well over 50 years now. It's everything. I mean, I'm currently working with oil and acrylic and, everything, just all kinds of mediums and fairly large pieces. I'm working on, over the last decade, I've been putting together a series of works under the title of The Journey. And it deals with, a series called Pilgrim, a series called Quest series, Once Were Angels series, which is what I'm working on right now, and another book that will, encapsulate all of this stuff, and just doing exhibitions of my work as well everywhere. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's just it's a way of life. And that's what I do.
I always marvel at painters in particular because that was when I wanted to draw when I tried to be artist. I was mostly with pencils and that kind of art. I always marveled at painters though because I could never get what was in my head onto a canvas, and I always marvel at painters who can do that. And I saw your work; you do some incredible work, and I always envy that because I'm like, man, it's just so amazing that you can take that image in your head and put it on canvas. If it wasn't a pencil, I could just never do it.
I mean, for me, sometimes I don't even know what's in my head or what I'm feeling until I pick up a pencil or a brush and just ask, let's go, whatever. And it starts to come out. And then almost in spite of me, something arrives and then I know what to do. I follow it rather than direct it. In other words, that means you let go of it. And quite often, whatever is, swirling around in your subconscious will come out if you let it. And we'll tell you, we'll tell you what you want to do.
I love it.
It's just a way of working.
Yeah, incredible. Well, Duncan, I can't say thank you again so much for carving out some time for me. I really do appreciate it. It means so much to us. We are obviously such huge fans of the movie and the film and all your work, of course. It's funny when I was a kid, before the internet was the internet, I remember watching the Monster Squad and then watching Zorro and then watching Star Wars. I was like, hey, I know that guy. That was before IMDb existed, and I could say, that's Duncan Regehr. But now, like looking back, I remember watching those shows and be like, hey, it's Dracula. He's in another thing. So I've been a fan of yours for many, many years. So it really does mean a lot to have you on for this, for our special 200th episode. And thank you so much for taking the time. We really do appreciate it. It's an honor.
And I'm very flattered that you've had me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll catch each other on a convention one of these days.
Sounds good. I look forward to meeting you in person.
All right. Thank you so much again, Duncan.
Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.